I now call a special meeting of the Snoqualmie City Council, special budget meeting to order. And just as a protocol, while this budget workshop is open to the public, there's no opportunity for citizen comments. The agenda does note possible council action on the ordinance adopting the 2019 to 20 biennium budget. If the council decides to consider action, we will accept public comment before the council votes on any items. And at this time, I'll turn the meeting over to Robert Hamoud, our finance director. Robert?
See if this is okay. This is working now. Great. Thank you, Mayor. So tonight, our agenda is first, we're just going to give you an update based on the requests. We made some changes to the budget based on the requests last week from council. We're going to go through that. We're going to give you another review of the budget enhancements, and then go into the deliberations and potential council action tonight. So the changes since the prior meeting.
Point of order.
Yes, sir.
Did we approve the budget for tonight?
The agenda.
Excuse me,
No,
let me try that again.
if someone
Did we
wants to-
approve the agenda for tonight?
No, let's do that. That is in order. Have a motion to approve the agenda.
Another point of order.
Councilor Summel?
Have we ever approved an agenda for a special meeting in these 10 budget meetings?
We haven't, because there haven't been agenda items to consider for vote. And because this one does have one for consideration of vote,
Gotcha.
I think
Okay.
it's appropriate to make that motion. So could I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda for this evening?
So moved.
Second.
Have a motion and a second to approve the agenda this evening. All those in favor?
Is there no discussion?
Oh, okay. Sorry. I thought we were going to do another motion, but you're right. We could do it here. Councilmember Mayhew, go ahead.
I move that we amend the agenda to remove the item for action tonight.
Second.
Motion to amend as stated by Councilmember Mayhew. Any discussion?
I'm not following what we're doing. I don't see anywhere on this Tuesday, December 1 there. So we're talking about which agenda? Let's get some clarity here. So,
You're not enough.
Maybe we should
Okay.
display it.
I think he's getting there.
public
We'll give
comment
it-
will be taken prior to council's vote. Doesn't say we're taking action, just possible action.
It's, yeah, it was noticed, Councilmember Lissay, so it gives you the option to take action on the ordinance to approve the budget tonight. I think some of the council members, perhaps the majority, were feeling that that would be more appropriate to do in the regular council meeting, since that's what the public is accustomed to. So the question is, do you even want to reserve the option or just take it off the table tonight? Councilmember Lissay.
I like the idea of at least having the option. We don't have to. It says possible. It doesn't say we will. There's no shalls in the language. So I would urge to have that as an available option to us after the next 4 hours.
So Councilmember Lissay made a comment that he wants to go at least till 10 o'clock tonight, so.
3 hours.
Any other discussion, comments? All right, with that, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Oh, can I have a show of hands, please?
What do we?
How many voted in
Voting.
favor of basically removing the option
Right.
of even voting on the ordinance tonight?
Right.
Okay. So that means if you vote,
I said I would.
okay. And all those in favor of, or against, nays? All right. The amendment passes, so back to the original motion, which means it's just a budget meeting tonight. There will be no actions on any ordinances tonight. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's carried. All right. Robert, continue, please.
Changes since the prior meeting, and again, we tailored, the council had requests to split out the capital projects.
Point of order.
Councilmember Shepherd.
Are we supposed to be having an executive session?
We do have an executive session on here. There was no amendment to change that, so it's still on the agenda. We're going to do that toward the end.
Start with that before we start with the.
Well, actually, I mean, that's a good point, because Councilmember Shepherd did indicate that she feels that does pertain to the budget, so I think it would inform her thinking on the budget, if it's council amenable to doing that.
Yes.
Councilmember Summel?
Does it refer to what we're going to hear or what we would approve? Because we can't approve anything tonight.
Well, I think it will inform your it involves the carry construction or the issue.
Right.
and So,
But my question is we only have 3 hours tonight.
Okay.
And if we keep it till the end, then that means that we make sure, I guess what I'm saying is having that executive session, which could have an impact on how you would vote, which we aren't doing tonight. I would like to make sure we give all the time we have possible to hear what we need to hear, and if we have time at the end, great. Unless the attorney wants to go home.
Mayor,
Councilmember Mayhew?
oh, go ahead.
I would just say, I think that getting the answers to the questions that are going to be asked might help different council members ask questions that are particularly on point to getting them to a decision. And so since that, I think our goal tonight is to try and get as far as we can towards a decision. I think that putting in council members in a position to do that by getting their questions answered so they can, preliminary questions, so they can then just be laser crisp at getting to answers tonight, I think would be helpful.
Mayor,
Bob?
this also will have bearing on the 2019 budget. We haven't had discussions about this particular issue and its impact, its potential for impact on the 2019 budget, so it's very important that you're aware of that. So if we need to add expenditures to the 2019 budget for this particular item, it will need to be done before Monday night.
I think that's precisely why Councilmember Shepherd wants to go into executive session about it. Any other discussion on this in council? All right, so I'm going to, if there's no objection, then I think there's concurrence that we'll just go ahead and go right into an executive session and discuss that issue as quickly as possible and address any questions and get back to the regular budget workshop. Okay, with that, we're going to recess and go into executive session.
Mayor.
Executive session is hopefully going to last approximately 15 minutes. We're also going to have an executive session pursuant to RCW 42.30.140, Section 1B regarding a real estate transaction. Bob Larson, Bob Sturbank, and Mark Hoffman, Nicole Sanders will be asked to partake in that particular part of the meeting. And that will, again, probably last about 10 to 15 minutes.
Mayor, if I could ask the finance director also attend the first
Okay,
executive
first
session.
part, you bet. All right, so with that, we're adjourning for executive session.
I would suggest we can go upstairs.
Yeah, let's do that. We don't think we need to drag the paperwork along and all that, do we?
No.
Okay. Special budget meeting is now back in session. So I'll turn it over to some finance staff if they ever show up. Can someone please find our finance staff? There we go.
My staff is changing the ordinance right now to reflect the recommendation from council.
But you can jump into this, can't you? Okay.
And so back to the theme of what we have with the changes. So per council request, we split out the capital projects, diverted all funding for capital streets, parks, and playgrounds to capital funds, and that includes project engineering that we actually had housed and operational for specifically for capital projects. So we separated that out. That's some of the change you're going to see. Governmental type budget reflects the operating picture of the city, and they're balanced. The funds are balanced with including the mayor's recommended budget enhancements. So that was the recommendation last week by council, was to split out the capital, show the balanced budget. And I'm going to show you the slides on the next page here about it. And we shifted the impact of the New Hampton development and revenues to 2019 is that the hotels are anticipated to open just after the new year. It actually went on Hilton's website, and you can book rooms starting January 20th. And free advertising for them. I think it was $134 a night, so they're running specials to fill the rooms. The appropriation of fund balance for capital funds are subject to city council actions in spring, like we discussed at the last meeting. We did not include the street tree project in the budget at this point. We did pull them out based on the discussions of council last time. This is another item that we'll be discussing in the spring, where it should be housed and how much to spend each year on that. And so you remember this chart from last time. This is an updated chart. Again, just showing the governmental type operating budget. So you'll see the sheet on the next page with the expenditures, 2 pages forward there. You see what we did was, the only thing different on this chart from last time is we pulled streets out, again, per the discussion last time. So we have all the administrative departments in there, including community development, parks operation, and then we have the special revenue funds that are funded from general funds, which is the Art Activities Fund, Environmental Sustainability Fund, Human Services Fund, Hotel Motel Tax Fund. So again, this is the expenditure, operating expenditures, and operating revenues for governmental type budgets. And you can see right here, we are running a balanced budget. And we're looking at the governmental type operating, and we pull out the capital. We're looking at a balanced budget. You can see in 2019, we do have revenues over expenditures. Same thing going through the period.
This is doing nothing for me. I can't figure any of this out.
Councilman Simo.
Just to, thank you for bringing forward a balanced budget. That's awesome. But of course, answer this question. On the revenue line, on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being ridiculously conservative and 5 being crazy overexcited about revenue potential, where would you say that blue line is?
We are in the
And
2
don't
to
say
3
3.
range. We're in the 2 to 3 range. We looked at this over and over again. We actually reduced these a little bit because we looked and we said, okay, maybe we're a bit too high in property tax. So we actually did reduce some of the out years a little bit. We're also
What does 2 to 3 range mean? Is that on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 to 10?
1 to 5.
You weren't listening, yeah.
Oh,
So,
I'm sorry, I missed that.
2.57?
1 being crazy conservative,
I got you.
5
Okay, I
being
missed that.
off the rails excited.
There we go, all right.
So you'd say a 2 to 3.
2 to 3 range.
Okay.
I think there's a lot of uncertain variables, but most of those uncertain variables come into the 21, 22 range, and that's the full impact of the Salish. So that's kind of an unknown. So on that, it's just hard to tell. We could be conservative. It just depends how much activity
So maybe
happens
another
out
way
there.
to say it is you would say, true or false, that it's more likely that that line will end up being higher than lower.
I can't say that for certain because, again,
That's what a 2 says.
2.5.
Okay. Okay.
Yes, I'd be non-committal to the answer for a couple of
Well
reasons.
done.
Part of it is because at this point, this is what we're comfortable in and confident in that number. There's a lot of uncertainties out there on the upside and the downside, and that's why we're going middle of the road with this. Again, there's some some cautionary tales about the economy, but we're still expecting it to grow in here. We definitely know that we have the Salish development coming through. We anticipate which years they're going to finish, but we're not, there could be some delays in there. So it could be a matter of we're going to get the revenue, but it could be a year delay or it could be sooner. Same thing with the Hampton Inn. It took a few more months, for example, than I think was originally anticipated for that project.
Okay,
So
thank
some
you.
of this will happen. It's just a matter of it might move instead of being 21. You might see some of that in 22 instead, or even sooner, depending on their construction.
Councilmember
schedule.
Ross, and then I'll ask the city administrator to come.
So I thought from previous charts where you've shown this, that you didn't include the enhancements in 21 and 22. Is that correct? Or do these include?
We include all the ongoing enhancements. That's correct. The ongoing, not the one time.
For 21, 22?
Yes, and we have in the past. Maybe at one. I'm trying to think, because
At that one point, it didn't have enhancements, but this does have it, right?
It does, yeah. Maybe
So
the
it's
first
pretty
council
accurate
meeting. I
then.
think probably the first meeting.
Bob?
I don't want to have the finance director belabor the out years, the 2021 and 2022 revenue projections, but we'll probably have a more, potentially, a greater impact, meaning more revenues in the sales and use tax area than, say, property tax. Property tax is pretty consistent. Depending on how the economy functions, we would expect that to perform better because we're bringing online some fairly significant projects. And we're very, very conservative on those numbers as we speak right now. That's what they might actually project for revenues.
Yeah, especially if you're looking at the Salish, because it's a full-blown conference center, so if they're filling up conferences every night, for example, it'll have an indirect impact on the community in addition to a direct impact, because people are not going to eat at the Salish every single night. They'll go up to the Ridge, they'll go downtown, they'll frequent other businesses. That'll have a boost in the sales tax revenues.
Councilmember Lissay, and then Shepherd.
I got actually two items, but I can focus on the first one. On the property tax line, the 8.11 million, I guess on the type revenue, the revenues page, that's our 0.5%, includes our 0.5% increase that was passed at the
0.5%,
last
right?
council meeting.
So the 0.5% carries over.
Well, what, yeah, so that
So
my
we're
question
still
is,
assuming 1%, a new 1% in 20.
so you're projecting 1%.
A new
For two.
1%. We're not projecting the banked 0.5 to be taken at this point.
So 1% in 20, 21, 22.
Right.
Well, not, yeah, okay. I'm not really looking at 21, 22. We're looking at 19 and 20.
But he's doing a forecast.
I get it, I understand that, but I'm not even trying to keep those out of my purview at this point, because we'll discuss that later. But that 2020 projected includes a 1% increase from 2019.
Right. So 2019, I'll just step back to 19. You have a 1% increase in 19. We're assuming will be
0.5%.
enacted by.
0.5%.
A 0.5% in 19.
Council,
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yep.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
The council would come back in 2019 to pass a 1% for 2020.
That's,
And then 2021. We are not assuming in this taking the banked 0.5% from 19.
so the,
Defer my second question till later.
Well, but to your point, Councilman Lissay, if you go back to the graph, those, no, yeah, those lines would either kind of cross or be touching on 21, 22 if you took that 1% out. In other words, those margins are pretty thin there in a couple of years.
The 1% $78,000 they wouldn't be touching.
What I'm saying is if you said, hey, do a projection where the council does 0% for the next 4 years, or include, not just this year, but next 3 years, or 1.5% this year, but then 0% the next 3 years, that would look different, would it not?
But yes, if you took it completely out.
You'd start seeing those lines touching or,
Correct.
getting close.
Councilmember Shepherd.
So we were going to get some information about the payment in lieu fee from the Salish.
I don't think we have that yet. But no.
No, that's only if they seek the property tax exemption for that, would
talk-
trigger the payment in
The
lieu.
Which per
Existing-
agreement they want for the first year.
Oh, I'm sorry.
There's the existing one, yeah.
Misunderstood. Yes.
They have a condition of approval requiring the review and approval by city council of an affordable housing plan that may or may not have an element like that.
That's not my
No,
question.
no.
no,
She's
yeah.
asking about the current Salish Lodge was taken off the tax rolls
Right.
2 or 3 years back, and what was the impact? What is the actual, what is the PILT for that? The county negotiated that. We had nothing to do with it, but they negotiated a payment in lieu of tax.
Right, so ironically, the city actually gets slightly more revenue with that property tax shift than without, because we get, all of the taxes we would have collected shift and we still get anyway through all other property taxpayers.
Right.
But we get the pill to the payment in lieu of tax on top of that,
Yes.
which we wouldn't get if they were paying their property taxes like everyone else.
Is that number in this chart?
Yes.
Should be included, yes.
What line is it coming through on?
It's actually coming through in the subheading intergovernmental revenues.
Okay.
All right, thank you, Robert.
And it is approximately 113,000 per year.
Okay.
Councilmember Summel.
The 113,000 per year is what we get on top of, so let me, to explain your point, I think. So there was an amount of money that they were paying in property tax.
Yeah, let's say it's.
They're not paying that anymore.
Right.
To make up for that burden, that has shifted on a distributed basis to every citizen in Snoqualmie. So we're still getting that money.
Every citizen, every business, yeah.
But everyone's paying an extra whatever dollar,
Right.
or whatever it is, right? Because they're not. But they are also having to pay something in lieu, which is that $113,000. So the city actually, by this decision, nets $113,000 of extra revenue that we wouldn't have normally.
Right.
I have that right? Okay.
Yeah, we fought that legislation and won in Superior Court, but it was overturned on appeal in the Supreme Court. We were trying to defend the taxpayers of the city, feeling that that was an egregious and unfair legislation that unfairly put the burden on all the other property owners. Councilmember Shepherd, and then Councilmember Lassay.
Is there a sunset to this?
Not that I'm aware of. Sunset.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Is there a sunset to this pay in lieu
It's negotiated each year
by the county?
by the county and the tribe.
I'm sorry, I thought you were
Correct.
talking about the House bill, or the bill itself, 1287. There's no sunset on that. Councilmember Lassay?
So I'm going to ask you to be speculative, which I know a finance director hates to be speculative. And you've sort of opened Pandora's box by doing projections. I would like your opinion of where we possibly may run into challenges in the projected 2020 revenues. Are there areas or where we should be careful of, that we should be conscious of, where those projections may fall short? Because we are really tight on balancing budget each year.
I would say the biggest hurdle out there, and again, this would be gloom and doom, worst case scenario. If you had a slowdown in the economy, if the Salish decided to delay some of their construction, that's probably your biggest item that's hanging out there in the 2020 budget. As far as any concerns out there, it's your largest growth.
If I can follow up on that, let's assume that happens. That let's say they delay to 2021, and they don't start construction until then, and we don't see revenue until 2022. So we're pushing a couple years out. Where do we make that up, and how do we address that in the 2020 discussions at the end of next year? Again,
You would
Big
reduce some of the
speculative
transfers to capital, so we'd reduce some of the, but we'd focus on reducing the capital before reducing the operating. But again, we would provide that as a recommendation to council. It's up to council to make those ultimate
so
decisions.
you'd take it out of the capital and reduce capital to cover operational.
The transfers that we have from the general fund,
transfers.
yeah, some of the.
No, that would
supports.
be entirely up to the council. I mean, we would do a mid-year correction, and it could be a combination of it could be the council decides to take its 1.5%.
Of course, I just wanted to get,
Yeah.
I want our finance director to know that we're
Yeah.
paying attention, and that we want to make sure we're not making a mistake and overreaching somewhere that might get us in trouble, because we don't know what the future is going to bring.
Councilmember Summel?
So do you have a chart that shows at the same time what our fund balance is doing? Because my question is, yeah, that is tight, but at the same time, are we growing fund balance? Because one of the options would be to grow fund balance less, right? So I think we've established, what is it, 10%? Is that our requirement, our self-imposed
Percent's on the
requirement?
bottom there.
Okay, so can you walk me through that and just walk us through that chart?
So there's a couple of caveats here.
I didn't
That's why
see
I
it.
know it's really tricky to just show the fund balance, because there are some caveats to this, as I've mentioned last time. If you look at the general fund target of 10%, And again, we pulled out, if you remember, during the evolution of this, we made a determination to pull out, just say that
Robert, use the microphone.
our Fund 4 that was set up as the sales tax for construction set aside should have never been counted as fund balance. So we took that out of the equation historically. So again, we're looking at what the 10% target is without ever counting that at all. And we look at the total expenditures without counting some of the spending that had come off that fund. So you're looking at 1.51 and 18 would be your 10% target, up to 1.91 in 2023. You can see your 20% target, which is again what we tried to build the budget around this year. You can see is about 3.2, 3.4, 3.5, and you can see that right now, based on what we have in the budget, and again, this is just on operations because there's going to be some choices on capital, and it's possible that this will be spent down or appropriated later on by council in the next 2 years, depending on some of the actions you take on the capital budget or to shore up some of the other funds that we talked about.
So-
But right
so is this
now,
what
if
you meant in your-
everything
Go
held
ahead.
constant with, if you took that chart, if you took the chart on the first page here, with these numbers, it would generate this projected fund balance here. So again,
The yellow?
the green, I'm sorry,
green.
the green on top. So again, you're above even the 20% target.
And this is what you meant, that if there was a delay, for example, on the sale issue, you could delay some capital, because some of this surplus could be directed toward capital projects.
Right, but again,
One
the
time-
caution with this is if the salish didn't happen, you're not going to realize all of that.
No,
So again,
it's
you
gonna
could
flatten.
realize
Oh,
a
okay,
million,
so-
million five
so-
less in 20
So it
if that
slows the
construction
fund,
didn't
yeah.
happen.
Okay. Councilmember Mayhew?
So the concern I have is that these numbers appear to be a complete divergence from how we've run the city in the past, and they don't attend to streets. And so I'm just very frustrated as I listen to this because we're trying to move forward on a discussion, and streets is missing. And we're getting the wrong idea, and I just don't know what to do about it.
Councilmember Mayhew, we were asked to pull streets out of the governmental type expenditures. We were asked to do that by council last meeting. We can go back to the videotape, but we were asked to pull it out, and we did have a discussion with you about that as well.
Okay, well, you absolutely have emails from me saying the opposite, and all the council was copied on it this past week. So whatever you were told, I just want the council to know, we have always had streets in this budget, in the operating budget in the past, and to not have somewhere between $1 million and $2 million of streets expenditures in these numbers, I think gives us a completely distorted view, and we're going to make bad decisions.
Councilmember Mayhew, what I did, and I did with consultation with the council, and at least what I heard in consultation with the mayor as well, when we decided not to put streets in here, we also took out the revenues that were attached to streets. So we pulled those both out of there. We can put them back in.
Those
and redo the
revenues
chart.
don't cover the cost of streets, and those revenues were never used. Mayor, the problem we have is if we're going to move to a decision, we can't keep moving numbers around to where we don't even agree that we're dealing with the same numbers.
Councilmember Sunwell?
So, my recollection from last meeting, which I don't even remember when that was, a day ago or a week ago, I don't remember, but, was that we had agreed to pull out all one-time revenues, which included streets, along with their accompanying one-time expenditures, and their correlated, whether they are enough or not, and their correlating one-time revenues, and that we were going to tackle, the idea was we want everything capital, whether it's lights, a pool, streets, that would be pulled out and appropriated, whatever the word is, and then we would tackle that in January. That was my recollection, so I thought this is what we were looking for, but it's possible that I'm confused.
Well, because streets can be kind of spiky, as we were talking about, because
There is spiky.
An overlay doesn't come
45
but every
minutes.
12, 15 years. Councilmember Mayhew?
Yeah, so the thing about streets is what we've done in the past is, so if we go back to 2018 budget, there's the budget had just under 1.2 million in the operating budget for streets maintenance. Now, that the total funding for the operating budget was about 600,000 short, meaning we didn't have enough revenues to cover, and that was covered by some transfers out. I think there's no record of this, but I think that thinking of that as applying to streets is reasonable, but that still means that there's at least 500,000 of streets that were in the operating budget. And so what I thought we were doing last time we met is we were shown some number somewhere close to $2 million for streets, but it had a lot of things that were spiky. And so what I thought we were trying to do is get the spiky stuff out and treat that as capital, but things like the employees that work on streets would be part of operating. So I was expecting to see a streets number in here of somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million. But to see zero, the concern I have is that if we go to the slide, I don't know if you have this slide here tonight, but they've shown us the slide for streets if you take it completely out, and it's massively underwater immediately.
That's why we're gonna focus on that. But I didn't want to show the whole budget being upside down because of streets, which we haven't made a determination whether that's operating or capital yet because it was commingled. So we wanted to show what the general governmental type was, and we thought from council was that if we pulled the streets out to show what the operations look like, it doesn't solve the streets problem. I totally agree with that. But we wanted, and we are showing streets here, and I want to, if I go through the presentation.
Yeah, but it's a fundamental. I know, I'm tired of going through the presentation. We've done it for 10 meetings. We're not going through I'm not staying quiet while we go through the presentation anymore if I think there's a fundamental problem. We can't keep doing this. We've got to get to resolution. And so my point is, spiky stuff in the streets, which I think is a heck of a lot of the streets budget, should be out in capital in my view. But non-spiky stuff, the salaries of our employees, should be in the operating budget.
Mayor?
Bob, go ahead.
Staff's prepared to show this to council. We're asking to get through this presentation. It's going to have to be done. We can't address individual council members' issues as they come up. We have to have an orderly process for this presentation. I'm asking for the council to allow us to do this so we can explain all these things. We've done a specific issue just for streets.
Councilmember May.
I move that we cut off discussion from staff until such time as the council's had a chance to discuss amongst ourselves what we think the priorities and the questions that we have are, and that we stop having all of our time run out on us. It's time for us to decide what questions we want answered and then have staff respond to us. I move that we do that.
I don't hear a second.
A second.
A motion and a second is stated by Councilmember Mayhew. Any discussion?
I don't know what that looks like, Jim.
I don't either, but I just don't want another meeting where we get nowhere. We somehow have to stop just sitting through a presentation that gets us nowhere. I don't know what it looks like, but I know it looks like not doing more of the same.
Bob?
Just to clarify, the city administrator does have, as part of the ordinance, the right to engage in the discussions. And I'm respectfully requesting that the finance director be included. And if they want to stop the discussion, then I think this meeting will have to adjourn because there's nothing else we can do. We are prepared to show you a balanced budget, including the streets.
Yeah, that seems the debates have been more about the format. We've been constantly changing the format and creating more confusion than anything. So, Councilmember Mayhew.
We've been changing the format as a way of covering the fact that we're making fundamental changes in the budget, and I object to that. And I think the council should be clear on what these fundamental basics of the budget are, what things are covered by operating and what aren't, before we move through endless slides where we get confused. I have a great amount of, first off, I categorically disagree with the notion that anyone other than the 7 council members have a vote on the budget. And I'd like to, if the city attorney thinks that someone else other than the 7 of us have a vote, I'd love to hear that from him. But otherwise, we have a vote, and I think that we should be driving towards our vote. And I think that we have to be in a situation of asking questions to where we get to consensus about how this thing works.
Councilmember James.
So I have an impression that the staff is asking for permission to tell us the whole story rather than half the story, which is frustrating. Let's get through that, and and then we can decide whether we'll cut them off, but I want to press forward. I don't want to start discussing before we have heard from staff.
Councilmember Shepherd,
One of the things that I'm feeling is that we.
can you please use the microphone, Councilmember Shepherd?
One of the things that I'm feeling is that we've really waded through a lot of presentations, and I don't feel that we really do have an opportunity for the council to discuss among themselves what they want, don't want in the budget. And I feel like we're running out of time with nothing but presentation. Or not nothing, that's an extreme case, but it seems like is dominated by presentation and not for us to really have a conversation. Well, my understanding is other councils are going through line items and they're deciding what they want to keep and not keep. And I don't see us getting to that point at all for this budget. So I'm a little frustrated with the fact that we don't have that level of control by this council.
Councilmember Sunwell.
We have 5 slides that we probably could have been through already if we hadn't spent the last 10 minutes debating this. There's 5 slides left, right? I have no idea, if we cut off debate and just talks about the sub it of us, I have no idea how to answer the streets question. I mean, unless Bob Jeans knows how much streets cost, I have no idea how to I don't know how we would have this conversation without staff. We've been doing this for 10 minutes and we have 5 slides left. We don't have 30 like most nights, we have 5 slides left. And let's be clear, the reason why we've gone back and forth between formats is because we've asked them to. Now, I think it's been with good reason, but we've been the cause, 5 new council members and a new financial director, right, who just finished 3 months ago the city's largest bond. Let's just like, the sausage making is terribly ugly, but we've got to get a sausage, right? So.
Point of order, I withdraw my motion.
Okay, who seconded the motion?
I did.
Are you okay to withdraw
Yeah.
the second?
I'm fine.
All right. Are we okay to have staff continue the debate or continue the presentation?
Since the motion was withdrawn, I believe we do.
Robert, go ahead.
So that is up to the council if they'd like to decide. I mean, one proposal you could do, if you like to decide to weave streets into the general fund for operations, that is a choice that the council can make. And we would definitely go along with that, and we'd give you some analysis for that. So that is an option available to you when you discuss in your deliberations. What we did with the streets budget, and I just want to, a side note, we've had the tremendous effort of staff, the public works staff worked really hard in taking another pass on this. Call out Drew and James for really working hard to make this happen. So we're not just snapping our fingers and coming up with new numbers. There's a lot of work behind this to try our best to get a sense of what the 7 of you would like to. And I just kudos to them. They've really worked hard on this. And one thing we did is you can notice from the last presentations is we tried to we reduced streets down to the bone as far as operations. We wanted to pull the capital out and just say, this is what you need to just maintain a street. We kept potholes in, but any new construction we took out. Any new sign replacement we took out, and we're going to actually use, we're setting what's called the Transportation Capital Fund. We actually already had that set up. We're going to be doing a $200,000 a year annual appropriation from REIT directly into that fund. So that will hopefully, separate the capital out, which is, I know what the council was looking for. And so we're just going down to the personnel. And again, if the council decided to make the decision to go to the general fund with this, we could, and we would move the revenues from the gas tax that we receive for streets into the general fund as well. But right now you can see we've significantly reduced this budget where we went from 1.1 projected in 18 down to pretty much 1.184 in 19, 1.2. So we did follow the guidance of council to get this knocked down. And you can see all new capital spending was eliminated from the budget. ER&R allocation reduced. Signal maintenance, right-of-way maintenance, street crack sealing, and potholes remain in the budget. Some maintenance expenditures reduced to better reflect 2019 estimates. So we had another month of financials come in for November. We looked at to Councilmember Shepherd's request, we looked line item by line item to make sure what they were spending, where they were spending it, and we made some reductions in kind because of that to come up with this budget. We also reduced globally the ER&R fund, because I know there was some concerns about the allocations being too high, and we actually took the vehicle purchases that we built into the charge-out model. We reduced it by 50%, which did reduce the services and supplies number significantly from what it was before. So we did make some major changes here. The one thing about streets is my recommendation, at least to the mayor and to council, would be to leave streets off general operating unless you want to move it into the general fund. If you want to move it in the general fund, then it would be part of that, yes.
Or at least the operations in this, Councilmember Vega's
Correct.
capital out, but operations or personnel and those sort of things in. Councilmember Lissay and then Sunwell.
With the, just recap again, I mean, this is, I understand this chart here tells me where your, what the budget is, what you're, what's being pursued. You know, bare bones, minor enhancement, personnel, stuff to operate the departments. Where's the where is that, so that's not included currently in our 18.158
No, so.
revenue or expenditure, so that's not in there at all?
Right, so just the general fund per se, I do have a slide. The changes in general fund support. So the first year, we are not supporting streets from the general fund at all. And the second year, we have 200,000 supporting that fund.
So what I'm getting at is, okay, so whatever's in, so in that table you were showing, you don't need to go to it, but whatever, because I want to stay here. That table you were showing, that's just, if, that's the, what we would be, you've currently got none of this in. But this is what would be in if we were going to just fund the department with a couple minor enhancements.
Right. That's correct. Some of the revenue sources,
That would
correct.
be, so then, but then again, go back, so then that's why that's zero. That's why street maintenance is zero. So instead of zero, it would be this number here.
811.
Well, what we do is, okay, say you wanted to dissolve the streets fund and move it into general fund. We have a fund balance that's supporting it. We liquidated already a fund for approximately $730,000 that went into the street fund this year. So if you dissolve the street fund, we would move a good portion of those revenues, because they were always considered general. We'd move those into the general fund to help support streets. So we move those funds back into the general fund.
So my
If you're gonna
question really
liquidate the fund.
is, I'll make it, it's a simpler question, is how do we pay for that? So where, if this is the expenditure, 1.184376, where's the revenue to support that?
We can do, we should probably do another chart.
The last one.
Show them the fund schedule.
Yeah. We have a fund schedule.
So what I'm getting at is if council decides to put that back in, where do we pay for it?
Well, you could turn to the table incorporated into your ordinance, page
Three.
3.
Should be one handed out tonight to them.
And so if you take a look at the street maintenance fund, which is fund number 101, under the estimated revenues for 2019, you'll see $714,000. And the estimated revenues in 2020 for the street maintenance fund is $914,000. And you can see by the end of 2020, we're predicting a ending fund balance of $285,000.
Okay.
Can you tell us, so if we just look at 19, that 714,500 you just drew our attention to, what are those revenues? What are the actual revenue sources?
I apologize, we should have done a slide on this one. We just ran out of time. 253,000 is the solid waste fee permits. That's the agreement we have with Waste Management. 311,000 is the gas tax. And we've also proposed a transfer in from REIT for streets capital that is still in there. So as far as
Capital maintenance.
streets capital maintenance that is still in there, of $150,000. And then we had liquidation of a fund balance from a different fund for streets that was unused of $730,000 that came in to the fund.
And Robert, you're not attaching any TBD revenues to this?
TBD revenues go directly into the Snoqualmie Parkway Fund, so they're
attaching it,
segregated.
not attaching
No.
it.
Which is streets, but. yeah.
So,
Okay. Go ahead and finish,
yeah,
Councilmember.
so let me just make sure I add this up, because I think you threw in some extra information you didn't have to. But if we're just looking at the 714, I think it's the three items, 'cause I just added them up, they add up 714. 253 solid waste fee, 311 gas tax, and about 150 from REIT. Is that right?
Correct.
That's your 714, but the expenditures are 1.184.
Right.
So you're short about 400,000. Is that what the other things you were mentioning? You were going to cover the other 400,000 with
We had a
fund
fund
balances?
balance of $730,000 from an unspent fund for streets that was unspent, that was
Right.
set up as a contingency fund and never spent, of $730,000, and that's going to help support streets in 19 and 20.
Thank you.
Councilmember Sunwell.
So that number for 20, that 714.5 number for 20 becomes 914.5, right?
Right. That's what this is. That's the 200,000 that we do have to support, because again, to Councilmember Mayhew's point, we do have a sustainability issue overall on streets, and so
Yeah.
we do need to increase probably in the future that.
So that increases by about 200,000, which is correlative to the $200,000. No. So
General fund.
that, hang with me here for a second. So what is the fund, that liquidated fund balance?
$730,000.
730. So we have a delta of about 470 in year one, or we have a shortage, right?
Right.
And then we have a shortage in year two of almost exactly 300, which brings us to about 770, and that fund balance is 730. That liquidation fund is 730. So we're 40-ish thousand dollars. We have to find $40,000 from somewhere else to do that. Did I do that right?
I think we have it. Hold on.
Because we're 470 short.
No, we
and-
still had a balance in streets above and beyond that. So our estimated fund balance, including that 730 and what was left remaining in streets from 18, is projected to be 1,056,202. So that's your starting point. And then you take the 714,500 and you can
Okay.
follow it right.
So what you're saying is as weird as it looks to have $0 show anywhere up on streets, what you're saying is that the revenue of 714 and 914 plus, maybe the wrong term, fund balance, more than exceeds the $2.4 million proposed for streets for, so would that mean then that, that what we're seeing here, regardless of what color you make it or whether you put it in or out of ongoing expenses versus capital, the money is there to sustain that for this biennium?
Yes, that is correct.
And it's the same money that was sustaining it an iteration ago before we asked you to change it?
There were different combinations in the past. So some of it was general fund. So for example, last year there was 550,000 transferred from the general fund because we.
He means earlier iterations in the budget that were presented to council
Yes.
during the past couple
Yes,
months.
yes. we've
Okay,
had
so
that for-
all you've done essentially with this iteration is you've done what you've thought you were told to do in terms of stripping out spiky stuff, I had to say it. And if you just put it back, the numbers would all basically be the same.
Be the same, but we also did make some savings. We realized some savings in the department as well when we did another pass through the department.
So if we did 10 more of these, would there be additional savings you'd find just over time?
Wouldn't be anything.
I don't know if I call them savings, it could be also kind
They're-
of cutting it thin.
they're
as it-
cutting
That turnip is a juicy turnip.
Yeah, savings start
expenditures.
turning into deferred maintenance after a while if you cut deep enough.
Gotcha.
so.
Okay, I think that clears it up for me.
Councilman Lissay and then Councilmember Mayhew.
So I think that on the streets issue, then, the issue for council is, do we want to follow what was decided last meeting, or what was discussed last meeting? We haven't decided anything, but what was discussed last meeting, and keep this out in out of the operating budget numbers, or we want to put it back in as the no spiky stuff? I had to say it.
It was him.
But then has the operational characteristics. The second part of that, and we don't have to talk about it, is I still want to get to the parks budget summary changes. I don't want to miss that, because I think that also has bearing in the same way that we're talking about streets. So we'll get to that.
Councilmember Mayhew.
Yeah, so just 2 points. First, if you could just flip to the slide with the streets budget. I do believe this is exactly what we asked you to do. And so thank you for doing that. I think this helps tremendously in the conversation. My surprise was that I thought it would be in the operating budget, but as you've pointed out, you could do that or not do that. You're open either way. So I think this is exactly what we asked for and gives us the number that we need to work with. My second point is that the reason I think we should go the path of putting this in the operating budget is, well,
The whole thing, or you mean just?
no, just streets. This part of streets. Although I wonder, I still have a question. Maybe some of the signal maintenance. Maybe there's a few things in those enhancements that perhaps even should push over to capital. But my guess is most of that's been pushed over. But in any event, if this moved into streets, when I say moved into streets, in the past, we've treated this as part of the operating budget. So, but what we did in the operating budget is we had an operating budget that didn't cover the expenditures. The revenue didn't cover the expenditures. And give or take, in 2018, the budget, and I'm talking about the original budget, not the amended, give or take $600,000 or $700,000 short. And it's the same darn give or take 600,000 that we're chasing around, I think, here in the 19. So, but here's my point. What we did in past budgets is we never covered that out of fund balance. We covered it with REIT transfers, okay? So what city finance director is recommending is use fund balance first and don't take much REIT. My point of view is fund balance is the last thing we touch. We have to be very, very thoughtful and very slow to touch fund balance. And so what I would rather see us do is move this number into the operating budget, but then cover it out of revenues. And if we have to cover it from some of those one-time revenues, then let's be honest, that's what we've done in the past. Let's take that on the chin and let's do that. But let's be purposeful where we have an operating budget, which is all the non-spiky expenditures covered by revenue sources that are recurring. And if we really need at this point to say, we don't have a study, but we're going to take X amount of REIT, well, whatever it is, let's do that work now, but let's not take fund balance. And the other thing I'll say is I think part of the problem has been solved by putting in this gas tax, which previously has been off the table. That may be a smart way of doing it, but that's a change for us to do that if we make that change. But I think when you put this back into the total budget, what we're going to, I really want to be clear about whether we're taking, how do I want to say this? If the amount of operating expenditures, I want to be real clear how we're paying for that. And if we're taking revenue sources and doing it with revenue sources that in the past we've said are off limits, I want us to be very clear that we're doing that and we're doing it on purpose.
Can I make a comment about one of the fund
I'm gonna go with
balances?
Bob, and then I'll come back to you, Robert.
What we have in what I'll call the Streets Maintenance Fund is what we as staff, and professional opinion of our Public Works Director and his staff, of those things that are not considered with capital. We're calling them capital maintenance because they're capital infrastructure, if you will, but it's just maintenance on those items. We're not adding anything to that. So we want to leave that as is. I would ask the mayor if council would entertain that we believe we have a certain amount of recurring REIT revenues that we're going to request the council consider putting into certain types of operational maintenance, not just for streets, but for other
Operational
things.
capital maintenance.
And it's upwards, I think.
I'm talking about hiring FTEs on REIT monies.
We've studied this. We've been back to our most lean year, which was 2012, which was the absolute bottom of the recession. We had very few homes that were selling any commercial properties. The actual, I'll call the average value of a home was significantly less than what it is now. We had fewer homes back then, we had fewer commercial properties, and at our lowest, if you will, of the REIT amounts, I believe that was roughly, Robert, correct me again, was it $300,000?
I thought it was close to 6.
That we thought was recurring. So that was our bottom. And now, 6 years later, almost 7 years later, we
It was
have
about
obviously.
600,000, right, Robert?
We have significantly more homes, we have quite a bit more commercial property, we have much higher values, and we can comfortably say, and we've studied this, that we think about $750,000, $750,000 is what we expect to have recurring revenues, even if we went into a recession. And I don't want to predict what a recession would look like, but we could comfortably feel that we could have those monies going towards certain types of operational costs year over year. And Robert can explain that.
And then treat the balance as more of a spiky revenue source.
If council's interested in hearing that, we'd love to explain that.
Those are good fiscal
Show it to you.
policies we should discuss and kind of dial in.
It would have to be a
Even on the any
change.
fund balance, I think, I mean, if it's growing, you know, there's, I think, reasonableness to say that there's a percentage you want to get it to and dip into it, but then stop at a certain percent. But to your point, Councilmember Mayhew, I think your concern is not building an ongoing, into the foreseeable future, way to fund some of those ongoing operational on a finite source of revenues. Councilmember Shepherd, then Councilmember Lissay.
So REIT has two different REITs, right? There's one for resale, there's one for new, or what is it, new
No,
sale?
there's,
REIT 1 and REIT 2, yes.
yeah.
One and REIT two.
Yeah.
So are we lumping those two things together right
We would
now
be,
in our
we would be
conversation?
following state statutes and what we're going to be proposing to council.
I'm just saying, are we lumping those two together?
No, well, I'm probably creating confusion by talking about two. So there's by state definitions, there are two different kinds of buckets of REIT 1 and REIT 2, and they have certain, you know, they're largely the same kind of restrictions, but various restrictions on how they can be used. The distinction I'm making in the REIT, which is a lot of the conversation with the council has been about the REIT, is entirely voluntary. It's an internal policy decision that we just say, there's certain REIT that, as Bob was just describing, even in the worst of times, we know there's a minimum amount of REIT that tends to come in, even in the bottom of a recession. And so if we know that we can count on a reoccurring, every year we're going to get at least a minimum $600,000, $700,000, or $900,000, we can treat that as reoccurring, smooth revenues.
You're still not answering the question.
Anything above that would be considered more spiky or unreliable. So it's going to be high one year, low next. So I thought the question was maybe a confusion about two types of REIT. And so I thought maybe I added the confusion to say that there's the smooth REIT and the spiky REIT, and that's the distinction.
I'm just, what
revenues.
Bob Larson is saying is he's talking about REIT as a bucket.
Yes.
And I'm just trying to understand, are we talking about both of them in that one bucket?
Mayor,
Yes.
I could have,
Thank you.
I could have
That's the
staff
answer.
make the distinction so it's clear to all council
Sorry,
members.
it was
I
a
wanted
very
to be
simple
sure
question.
I
We made it too
understood.
complicated. My apologies, Councilmember
And
Shepherd.
then,
Fun story, though.
and then I understand that, yeah, there's some limitations, and I know that you know what the rules are, so I'm
Yeah.
not really concerned about that.
All right.
Isn't it growing, though? Isn't our REIT revenue growing?
Yeah, that's fine, yes.
Yes, it has been.
Okay.
Year over year.
That's it. That's
Councilmember Mayhew and Councilmember Shepherd. Councilmember Sunwell.
No,
Mayor,
Lissay's first.
Oh,
It was actually-
Councilmember Lissay, that's right. Oh, it's Councilmember Lissay, then Councilmember Mayhew, and then Councilmember
Be a
Sunwell.
flag that we can put up.
Little numbers.
Go first.
Okay, so I think that these comments on REIT are very, very good comments, and I think we should take this very seriously and as part of our discussion. And I think I completely agree with the approach, and the rough estimates all seems very reasonable to me and appropriate. But let me try and share the thinking that I had going into this. Can we go back to the expenditure slide? Actually, sorry, can we go back to the revenue slide? So these revenues, so if we look from 18, the total, 16.5 million goes to a little over 18.2 million. So in my mind, goes up $1.5 million, round numbers, very round numbers, goes up $1.5 million. So that's kind of sticking in my, so remember, those don't include the non-recurring revenues. It doesn't include any REIT, for example. It doesn't include the gas tax that Finance Director referred to. So, but it goes up, say, $1.5 million. All right, let's go to the next slide. if you take the total of the 18 expenditures, it's 15.8 million. If you add in the streets operating number from the other slide we were looking at a minute ago, it's 1.2 million. It's 1199249. Let's call it 1.2 million. So your 15.8 goes to 17 million, round numbers. That's 18. So the point is, when I make this statement that what we did in 18 was we were a bit short, we didn't cover all the expenditures. You got expenditures of 17 million when you add in streets, and you had revenues of, if we go back one, 16.5.
But not if you add the waste fee, the.
No, I understand.
Okay.
I'm getting there, Mary. You're exactly right. That was exactly the next point I was going to make. So we covered that with some REIT and some of these other these non-recurring revenues. So in a way, in fact, what we've been doing in history is saying these are off limits, these non-recurring revenues, but in reality, we then brought them back in, and that's been every year.
Some portion of them, yeah.
Some portion of
But
them.
we did them in a very, like you said, eyes wide open kind of way,
Yes.
going, hey, is this spiky project appropriate for that spiky revenue? And the council's gone, yeah, and they've made very clear connections to those dots.
Absolutely,
To fill
Mayor.
that
Yeah,
gap.
not critical of that at all, just
Yeah.
pointing out that that's the case.
Yeah.
So, in my mind, as we moved into 18, we have revenue going up $1.5 million. We're up to 18 million. So we were short in 18 about 700,000 or so. So that's what we brought in from these other sources. REIT, gas tax, so on. We brought in about 700,000. So since we gone up $1.5 million in revenues, what I was hoping to see coming into this big picture was the idea that our expenditures, including streets, would not go up above 18. So in essence, the $1.5 million of new revenues would go about 700,000 to closing that gap on the non-recurring, and then about 700,000 or so for enhancements. That's sort of, in my head, what I was hoping I would see happen. So, but with this budget, without streets, so if we add streets into 18, what we have is revenue of 18.2 million, and let's go to the expenses. But we'd have to add in, to that 18,134, we'd have to add in 1.2 million. It's 118,436. So you get to the number of about 19.3 million. So instead of closing the gap from about 700,000, the gap's actually widening. So that's the big picture I see. And that's what I'd hope we sort of grapple with, because what that suggests to me is that the amount of enhancements, we really didn't do what I'd hoped to see us do, and we really spent all of that increase on enhancements, in fact, plus made the gap a little bit wider. So that's what I'm concerned that I don't think we should be doing. But I do think that all of those things have been separated out for capital, should be, and that we'll pay for those out of those, I think the rest of this is the right approach. I'm just worried that we're going up too much on the operating expenses.
Councilmember Lassalle and Councilmember Sunwell.
Well, my comment and discussion was going to be that I think the big picture, and all the details important. I appreciate the commentary on that, because that helps clarify a few things on how that analysis is. But again, if it goes back to going in with our eyes open and recognizing that we're not going to make, unless we unravel the sweater and start all over again, I think we are where we are. And if we have our eyes open looking at it and knowing that we're using one-time revenues to close the gap, then I think that's something we have to grapple with as a council. What I was getting at is that we've focused on streets now for the last 40 minutes, and we still haven't talked about parks, which is a $2.234 million number that has had no explanation, that's been also pulled out. And I don't see that in operations. I'd like to get some explanation on where that is. Because that 18.1, not only could it be 1.2 higher before streets, it could be 2.2 higher for parks. And how would we pay for that?
Councilmember Sunwall and Councilmember Ross.
So my comment was I was going to ask to move on to parks, but if there's other things we need to talk about streets, that's fine. But to Councilmember Lasay's point, that's a larger number. So I just want to make sure in the remaining, I mean, I think the idea is I would love to have an hour plus to deliberate tonight. And we're 35 minutes away from having a minimum of an hour. And so I just want to make sure we get to parks.
Yeah, understood.
That's all.
Councilmember Ross.
I just have a question, if you can clarify. Jim, I was trying to follow your math on the expenditures and also the revenues. Did you add in then the street fund, the million?
I didn't, but I think that's a discussion we could absolutely have. I was just keeping, because you're right, because we didn't have, so 700,000 came from somewhere last year. It was Reed and these other sources. So, yeah, maybe we should be adding that in. I think, you know, my point was just ideally, in my mind, that we would have closed the gap and found out of that $1.5 million of new revenues, we would have covered streets and all the operating expenses. That's my first wish. My second wish is that if we don't think we can get to that, then I'd say, please let's then identify the revenues that we're going to use to close the gap, including streets, so that we're intentional about which revenues we're using, but not use fund balance.
Right.
So that was kind of my two thoughts.
Right. I think we were pretty clear last time that we did not want to use fund balances at all for the streets. And we stated that. But
All right, so we're ready to move on to parks?
One clarification on streets I want to make. So we are not using, when we looked at the fund balance here, meaning what we consider the general fund balance, I just want to clarify, we are not using any of this for streets. So you're not using that for streets at all. What we're using for streets is an unexpended amount of $730,000 that accumulated over several years that was meant to go to overlays, crack seals, and general capital maintenance of streets and was never expended. So that's what we are using to supplement the street fund because it's just been sitting there. It is above and beyond. It is not part of the reserve balances. So just to clarify that.
All right, so if you're going to move on to parks, Robert?
Really fast, though, I do want to show Reed because it has popped up a bit. And Councilmember Shepherd, the statutes are now the same for REIT 1 and REIT 2. In the past, they were not, and they changed a couple of years ago. So I think that's what you're trying to get at.
Yeah, I
But-
just wanted to make sure we weren't just talking about one or the other.
Yes, it's
somehow.
Mayor,
about the same.
Mayor, I think in deference to council, we just need to, we can come back to this later, but we need to go to the parks. I've asked to do that. And I want to make a comment before we start. There was a question about where the parks, the $2.23 million budget is. Well, it's in the.
No, it's in there. That was my
Okay.
mistake.
All right, good. To make sure does everybody else in council understand it's already in the budget here under the 001 fund? Okay.
So parks, again, we made the same,
Pony token.
Problem solved.
per the council request, we made the same kind of fine tuning with parks where we pulled out everything that was capital related as much as we could to this and just looked at what's straight operations and maintenance. And that's the number we came up with. As you can see, we've pretty much taken out the growth.
Councilmember Sunwall.
So now that, now that it's been pointed out to me that this is actually in the budget and not separate like streets was, I'm actually feel like I'm done on parks. And again, not to beat the dead horse on the deliberation, but I do want to make sure we have time tonight to make sure that we can deliberate, which probably means going back to staff at some point and asking some clarification questions, but to put on, all this data that we received, and just start figuring out, because we can, Councilmember Mayhew, I believe, if what was the number, 700,000? So or I guess there was that 1 point whatever million dollars of increased revenue you were hoping would cover all these other things. So if there's $700,000 that we feel like we want, we can do that, right? But we just need deliberation to be able to do that, right? And then bouncing ideas off of staff to say what would be the consequences of cutting 200 here and 75 there, or, you know, whatever that is.
Mayor?
Okay, yeah. Can you, if you guys can, go ahead.
I just
Bob.
want to make one comment. I want to make sure we're clear, because I certainly want council to do their business. I want them to deliberate. I want to make sure we're clarifying the amount that is being proposed for the streets maintenance coming from the general fund. How much is that, Robert?
0 the first year, 200,000 the second year.
Okay, so that's what we're talking about. 0 in 2019, 200,000 in 2020.
Yeah,
In our staff's professional opinion, I'm not trying to disagree with any council members, but we believe that's the difference.
Okay.
Delta that we have.
But my question would be, so that covers us, and I realize we're here to discuss 19 and 20, right? But that streets fund balance
Yes.
that exists, right, will be gone at the end of 20.
Yes.
So my question then becomes is, do we need to do something in 2019, 20, so that in 21, 22, we're not drawing on a fund balance of 0, that we have tweaked our ways so that we're not even having this conversation in a year and a half, right? Because we made some adjustments in this biennium to make sure that we're addressing the next one. Does that make sense?
Yes, and
Okay.
that's where council has full latitude to discuss it now. You can discuss it into the new year. You can discuss it as part of the next biennial. We obviously have projections going on, but yes, the proposed enhancements would be the first place I would, through the mayor, suggest that council look at if they want to try to shore up that particular fund balance at the end of 2020 and ask for staff to look at solutions. I don't disagree with Councilmember Mayhew said earlier. We have a lot of enhancements, upwards of $1 million each year.
We got a lot of work to do on the whole CIP in the next couple of years.
Okay.
To get a real, we've got to get the pavement condition index done and just get a real good handle on what are those liabilities. My memory might be a little fuzzy, but, hearing that, we've been building up a $750,000 of fund for the streets the last several years, that wasn't just like a mistake, oops, we forgot we did that. That was very intentional. I mean, when we were looking at trying to find the bond monies to finance a lot of the reconstruction of downtown, it was, look, we got to look beyond the 6-year window at the ridge and know what's happening with that sleeping giant of infrastructure waking up. That's going to get our attention, so we have some resources to do that. And to Councilmember Mayhew's point, a lot of those streets projects can be rather spiky. But, so it could be a year where we have several significant overlays to do, and then it quiets down for a couple of years, and then it spikes again. So it's not irresponsible or reckless to be tapping into that balance that was saved up and built up precisely for this reason. But it is going to get, more active, as that infrastructure becomes up on its first maintenance cycles. There's going to be a lot more activity come up for several years running. So it's definitely something we have to keep our eye on. Councilmember Summerall and Councilmember Lassay.
Yeah, one of the things I kind of have jotted down is we're at a point now where the streets are all ours, right? So developers built them largely,
Yep.
right? And so now we're at a point where all of the maintenance and the repair and the resurfacing falls upon us, and that's why I think that's the new norm. And I think what's also the new norm is that we have a certain percentage, as has been identified, of REIT, that just like sales tax, I mean, we have a pretty good idea what that's going to look like that is reliable, right? And so now I think we need to start thinking about, what was traditionally something we just set aside. Now that we have this additional burden and we'll have it forever, right? Do we take a portion of that very reliable capital revenue type stuff and start funneling it into a more regular basis? And I guess I would ask, and not necessarily to be answered tonight, is Dan and company I would like, is it possible, because you had mentioned there are going to be years where there's a lot of overlays and years where there aren't. Is there a way in our planning of surfacing streets that we can actually eliminate that, right? Where we can get a calendar where, you know what, barring sinkholes in the middle of the thing or whatever, we know that pretty much every year it's going to be about this because this street's on that schedule and that set of streets is on this schedule. I would love to be able to, because the streets were built
You're
Yeah.
you're hitting it right on the nose, Councilmember Sunwell. Yeah, it's similar to, it's the same principles apply to that you would to the fleet program. You're trying to take those sort of spiky costs that spike one year and then settle down, and you smooth it by allocating revenue that will smooth it over the years.
But I'm actually I'm even saying differently. I'm not even talking about allocations. I'm talking about these streets were built in phases. We should be resurfacing them theoretically in phases, which means we would have year over year, for the most part, we would have roughly the same amount of expenditures on resurfacing than we would otherwise.
Although they don't tend to age in the same fashion. You know, Fairway, my street's coming on 20 years and it's in excellent shape. Other streets are 15 years old and they're cracked and they're a mess. You know, so they tend to, depending on what's.
So you're saying the Mayor Street is better than Rosa Street?
Well, I will, in my defense, it was paved long before I was ever ran for office, so yeah, no favor. Bob, you're going to say something, then I'll go to Councilmember Mayhew.
I just want to note that we have that plan that's coming forward. So we'll have a master
Yeah.
plan. And
Cool.
Go from there.
Yeah, the PCI will be critical to inform in our decisions and prioritizing. Councilmember Mayhew.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think Councilmember Sunwell's point is dead right, but I think it's, you know, it's kind of like, in a way, it's kind of thinking about, you know, saving for kids' college. You put in for some years, and then there's some years where you pull out. So I think what Councilmember Sunwell is getting at, and I think what City Administrator is saying is this is exactly why you've asked us to put this capital discussion off until January, February, is you want to come with a whole picture where you've actually looked out at those streets and said, you know, yeah, here's a schedule that has all of them in there, and kind of here's roughly where it's, you know, going to hit, and yeah, you'll move it all around as we get there based on, but then you kind of give us a big picture and say, so on an annual basis, you're going to have to be funding about X, City Council, right? I think that's the kind of thing you want to take us through. So I think it may not be that they actually pave exactly $1 million a year or whatever the number is, but I think they're trying to get us to that kind of a thing. Is that right?
I think it's accurate, yes. Councilmember LaSalle.
So one very detailed question, then I'll go on. I got two items. On the full-time equivalent employee salary schedule, we got footnote number 2, and even with glasses on, it notes that that we are considering adjustments for the management and professional employees for 2019. So the very basic question is, do the allocations towards the administrative departments and all of the personnel services in each budget include that potential increase? So we did it by 5% roughly across the board. Yes. That will cover all of that plus benefits plus all the things that go along with the increase.
Correct, because we increase the benefits as well.
That answers my question
You
there.
missed that very robust conversation at the last budget meeting.
I'm glad we did it in 30 seconds, so there are some goals, it's really simple.
All right.
I think what I'm getting at then is, I think we're getting really close to the point at which we can start having some deliberations on this. We've got I think a clear enough view of the governmental revenues, a clear enough view of the operating expenditures. We have an understanding of streets and where that sits. We see that the parks has been fine-tuned. I don't know where else we need to go until now we can start talking about the enhancements, talking about the fund balances, talking about where we want to expend the dollars.
Can I ask that we step back for one moment and before we move down from parks, have the staff, we did do a little bit of shaving and fine tuning there, and if they could just give a brief, perhaps Dan or Robert or someone could give a brief summary of what were some of the last minute tweaks on that parks budget. And then I'll come to Councilmember Mayhew and then Sunwell.
We lowered a bit. We looked at some of the line items. We looked at what was spent this year, and we lowered some of the increases for next year. We also pulled out anything that looked even remotely like capital that would be expended from what we are calling the Parks and Playground Capital Fund. And again, that's supported each year right now with the support transfer from REIT that we have proposed. So again, it's reducing everything the council is looking for, is reducing anything that looked like it could potentially be a capital item or is related to a capital item, we took out of there. And that includes engineering. There's some engineering costs for certain projects that should have been in capital, those types of things.
Okay. All right, Councilmember,
We also decreased the ER&R, like I said, the allocation of ER&R, we decreased the charge out to that department as well.
okay, for round robin, I'm going to go to Councilmember Ross, and then who, was it Mayhew and Sunwell that had your hands up too? Or?
I think he was first.
Okay. I agree with that.
So you took it out, and we're planning on looking at capital projects in the spring, but there's going to be some that need to start right away. And so did you leave those in the budget, or
We
where?
have appropriations, so we did, per council last time, we do have the appropriation left in those capital funds. That includes streets capital, and it includes the parks capital. So then you just come back in January, February, and we'll have that
Okay.
discussion on.
So they've identified those
prioritization.
projects, and they'll be back with
Yes.
those.
Yes.
Councilmember Mayhew.
Could you move to the expenditure sort of orangey, pinky slide color?
Spiky, orangey, pinky.
So just 2 points, or 1 point, one question. I just checked the proposed 19 column back against prior presentations. It looks like you've tweaked just about all of these fairly small amounts, but you went back, I assume, with the same principles that you've just been discussing, right? Okay. The one thing I'm just not clear on is there's a line called non-departmental. It's $1 million, and it's up a lot from 18. Could you just talk to us about what that is?
We did have a slide at a previous presentation, but I'm not going to shift through because I don't know which of the 9
It's
it
here.
was, but I'm just going to go through it really fast with you. Hold on just a moment.
Oh, where'd that come from? Oh, here it is.
a-
Is it?
We have a page here. We have a page.
That's, okay.
We have the 426,000 contingency in there.
That's the vast majority of the
2.5%.
difference.
Right.
It's not
We have the community development, the
Why don't they
support
match?
transfers are not in this orange here. We have that in this separate. So this is just,
the numbers that are up there.
you have to take the transfers out. So if you take the transfers out column, you should be very close to that.
Yeah, it does.
That's
1013, I see.
almost 6. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the number. Okay.
So under non-departmental, the vast majority of that difference is the general fund contingency that was put in for $426,000.
So but when we look at that, because one of the questions I know that's kicking in my mind is what happened to the 1.5 million of revenue, but, so that's 600,000 up over 18. So what is it, okay, can you just help us understand what changed from 18 to 19? Oh, contingency is, what is,
Well, the
I'm sorry.
contingency.
Administrator, you just told me what that was, and I didn't catch it. Could you say it again?
We built the contingency in there.
It's
So we built a
2
2.5% contingency each year.
Oh, contingency.
Right, we built a general fund contingency in there.
There's sort of 425 of not specified, is that?
Right.
That's
fair
correct.
enough? Okay.
We just place it in the non-departmental, so it's not allocated to any particular department function.
That's, unless you'd like unless Councilmember Mayhew, you'd prefer we appropriate the general fund.
What's that now?
Unless-
I think that is general fund.
It is
Unless
general
unless you'd prefer we appropriate the entire general fund, as we've done in the past. I'm being facetious. This is the way around not appropriating the entire.
I don't think this is a good way around, but that's a different discussion, which we can have
Oh,
later.
okay.
But it helps me, there's an important question I think that we're going to ask, which this is a big piece of, which is what happened to the $1.5 million of new revenue? And if we intentionally put a chunk aside, then that's part of the answer.
Yes.
Councilmember Sunwell.
So I don't know if this is a motion or not, but I was going to make a motion that we take a 5-minute break and then begin deliberations upon coming back, which absolutely will involve questioning city staff on additional things, but maybe use that break as an opportunity to come back and our mayor pro tem is missing, so I don't know if we want to, maybe we get back, maybe we talk about a format of what deliberations look like.
Mayor amateur Tim.
Yeah, or maybe go back to the old pro tem, not
Councilmember Sewell, I'm going to ask you to focus that motion. It's
So I would make a motion that we take a 5-minute potty break and then come back and begin deliberations.
All right, thank you.
Sounds good. Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any discussions? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is carried. So with that, we'll take a 5-minute recess. We'll come back. right, council budget workshop is back in session. So motion was for presentations to cease and to turn it over to council for deliberations. Staff is here to answer your questions. Councilmember Shepherd.
So I was going through the salary survey, and this relates to what we're talking about.
Peggy, can you speak into the mic?
Sorry. Thanks for reminding me. So I was going through the salary survey, and I noticed that we didn't have enough data for the salary survey for city attorney and the assistant for the city attorney. And as I was looking at how many cities of our size, and actually larger than our size, do not have city attorneys. So we are unusual in having a city attorney, and I know the one position that we are looking to add is a second city attorney. I really would like for us to think about, do we really need 2 city attorneys? Especially when it's rare that our cities of our size even have one.
How are we discussing this? Was it just open conversation, or are we going to request to be heard? How do we want to, procedurally, how do we normally do
The
that?
typical recognized members is they raise their hands and do round robin. Councilmember Lassay?
Well, I think it's a good point Councilman Shepherd brings up. I don't believe it's a second city attorney. I think the conversations have always been about assistant city attorney, and that's how it's described. I think a lot of factors play into that. The current workload of the assistant to the city attorney and the city attorney's work. I think there's a lot of factors in the public engagement with that department and the activities that they go through in engaging in the public realm and responding to requests for information. Certainly, I think we could look at that, whether it's absolutely critical to the operations of the city, or if maybe there's a scale issue of if that need is there. But maybe there's some response from the administration on.
I think that, yeah, go ahead, Bob.
It was thoroughly evaluated. We actually are not, and well, we aren't caught up. We have quite a few things that are from different department heads, different issues that are coming up that we are not being able to tend to. And I can certainly ask the city attorney to weigh in on specifically what those issues are. But I can assure council that if we do not have our city attorney or an assistant city attorney doing these things, we'll have to contract them out. We have to get them done. And it would cost us significantly more money to do that. And so we weighed the options of having an internal assistant city attorney under the direction of the city attorney, which is much easier to manage and control versus having a contract attorney. And we felt, we recommended through the mayor to the council that we need additional legal assistance of I'll call the general nature. We still have attorneys that are contracted for prosecutorial services, public defense, personnel issues, human resources, contract law, probably forgetting a few. So we have a lot of different things that we don't even have this city attorney do because we don't have the time for him to do it. And even if we had an assistant city attorney, we still have to do civil issues that are way beyond the demand. We do not have the quantity of service available to meet that demand.
So I'm going to step back for a second, Council, and just ask a procedural question of you. And I think maybe Councilmember Lassay was hinting at this. We have a little more over an hour left, unless you want 2 or 3 hours if we go to 10 or 11. But, one council member could introduce a subject and that could consume a half an hour or more of time. And so I think for the sake of time, I'm inclined to just quickly poll the council and sort of ask the question, are you firmly in support of this, or you have questions about it, or are you firmly against it? And if it seems that only one council member has a concern or two do and the others are strongly in favor, and a half-hour debate is not likely to change that ratio, then we just move on. Does that make sense, Council? Does that sound like an efficient way to go about it? All right. So if I can ask on this question of the assistant city attorney, we've already had some discussion on this as we went through the budget process. Can I have a show of hands for all those that feel very comfortable with this enhancement and are in support of it? If I could just see a show of hands. Okay. Those that have serious concerns about it? Those that are kind of on the fence? Okay, so it seems firmly that there's I don't know, Councilmember Shepherd, if you look, there's a strong support for this, and so are you okay to move on? All right.
Can I just make a point on it, though?
Councilmember Ross?
Sorry. If you looked at the budget summary, it seems like the legal budget is going down because you've added someone, and so you have less outside services that you're going to use.
Yeah, it was, basically, we saw it as more of a wash or less, I mean, with
Right.
offsetting with not having to do someone outside services. Councilmember Sunwell. Oh, I'm sorry, Jim, did you have your hand up? Councilmember
Probably
Mayhew.
did. We kind of switch off. I don't care, really, whatever. If I go before him, I sound smarter than if I go after him. So is that okay if I go
Yeah,
before
that's
him?
fine.
Talking, it doesn't really matter, 'cause he's
So
taking over.
I guess what I'm going to state is just a general principle out of that exercise we had at our offsite, seems like 3 years ago, but I think it was less than a year ago. I was a red. Red means I'm not super detail driven. And so my idea of a budget is I want something that's balanced, that's using the appropriate funds, and that seems reasonable. I am not here to tell Dan that he can have 18 cars instead of 20. There'll be a time for that, because remember, all this stuff actually has to come back before us to be spent, right? But I'm not in a position, because I feel like we have a tremendous city staff that knows way better than I do as to how many paper clips they need and how many cars they need and how many staff they need within reason, right? And they have spent more time on this budget than we have. That seems impossible, but it's their job, so they have. And so I guess what my comment will be surrounded around is I am concerned, like Councilmember Mayhew, about the $1.5 million in increased revenue. I don't want to say evaporating, because that makes it sound like it just went to nowhere. It's here, right? I get the expenditures, but my challenge would be for staff to come back with kind of that $700,000 or so, sharpen those pencils more, and figure out how we can get to a spot where we haven't eaten up that entire $1.5 million of increased revenue that we used. And I'm not about to say it should be an affordable housing study, should be nixed. I'm not about to say that it should be the city attorney, assistant attorney. I would like the staff to figure that out. You guys have 6 days, no, 4 days to come back with that, and then we can go from there. So that you're not going to hear from me to like pull anything specific off of this enhancement list.
Councilmember Mayhew, then Councilmember Jeans.
So just two thoughts. I think as Mayor, my suggestion would be as you poll us for things, maybe don't ask us where we stand on particular things, because it sort of begs the question if a council member is trying to talk about something, they think something should be discussed, but maybe just ask us, do we want to spend time discussing that item?
Yeah, that's a good
Maybe
good
that
point.
would be a better.
Thank you for the
Because
suggestion.
it's a time allocation without necessarily, okay. So the thing I would like to see us do with the operating fund, and I think there is something having to do with the capital funds that we're really not touching on that we need to deal with, but I don't think it's that controversial, but we're going to I think we'll probably have to take it up at our next meeting, because there are actual capital funds in this proposal, and we haven't talked about them, but I think there's a big picture kind of thing that's going on, but we'll just need to understand what we're doing there. But setting that aside, I would just say, I think this discussion about fund balances, we have a lot of fund balances. You can see them on this schedule. You see how many fund balances there are, and fund balances are very different things. There's a reason that Finance Director talks about reserves, and he makes this distinction about fund balances that he thinks of as reserves as opposed to fund balances that aren't reserves. And there's a difference between capital fund balances, which I gave that analogy of saving for college, and it goes up and then it gets spent down, which is a whole different way than internal service funds work, although it has some similarities, right? We build up those pools and those vehicles, which is different than operating funds, which we basically use up every year and have some left over, but then we have some reserves. So it's a complex discussion. The point I want to make is, until we've had that discussion, I don't think we should spend any fund balances, not a penny. Think about all of the things that we need to spend on that we may need to use fund balances on. For example, we know that we need a new ladder truck for the fire department. We know we don't have that fully funded in our current plans. So maybe that gets met with some of our fund balances, maybe. You can see that I could list out a whole bunch of things. When we think about the roads, maybe there's some roads that need to be, I'm going to say resurfaced. I hear this term grind and overlay, but I'll just say resurfaced. Maybe some of that needs to happen this year. Maybe a lot needs to, we don't know how much yet. Maybe we need to use some fund balance for that, not just future revenues. Maybe once we look at kind of that big schedule, we'll want to use some fund balance, not just future revenues. Same thing with some of our buildings. Maybe there's things we did that we put that new fence up at the police station. Maybe there's some roof things, or I don't know what they'll all be. But I think until we've really had that capital discussion and gone through those needs, which we know are much different than they were over the last couple of years, it's a whole different thing as we look forward, even in 19 than it's been in the past. As we look forward to that, look at those revenues, I think we shouldn't touch fund balance. So I would just pitch that, and I'd say, I think what we ought to do with this operating revenue, operating budget, I think we should put the streets fund into the operating, and then I think we should solve, and I think we should think about, we should solve how we then get to balanced. And balanced to me means the expenditures are covered by the revenues. So maybe we need to bring in and assign some revenues like that gasoline tax, perhaps. Let's look at that. But let's struggle with that big picture until that works, and then have the rest of the discussions about fund balance and so forth and non-recurring revenues put off till we really have time to grapple with that. So I'd like to see us do that, and I'd encourage us to spend our time doing that first. That's kind of my 2 cents.
Councilmember Jeanson, Councilmember Shepherd.
Councilmember Mayhew is doing what I was going to suggest that he does, and that is lead the discussion so that maybe by 9 o'clock we'll get somewhere, rather than sort of go in some other direction. So I just want him to lead us. We're close to the end, and I want him to lead us to the end. And it sounds like he's given us a roadmap, so just keep us on that roadmap.
Can I ask a question of the council for direction of staff? Is the council looking to reduce the regular general fund operating budget to shore up the streets budget? Meaning, do we have to look at across the board reductions and possibly, impacting personnel as well to make that 700,000? That would be my question.
Let's discuss that.
I don't think we know yet. I don't think that's a presumption at all.
Right.
Is that
I'll
a
go to
bad answer or a good answer?
Let me go to Councilmember Shepherd, and then we'll come back to that. Councilmember Shepherd.
So I'm trying to follow Jim's train of thought, and I'm looking at this page.
Councilmember Shepherd, again, I'll encourage you to try to use the microphone as much as possible.
Sorry. So I'm looking at this page, and it has a estimated beginning fund, which means what we're going to have left over from 2018 of approximately 49 million. And then when you look at what the ending balance is from that, it is 33 million. So we are dropping about 16 million from the end of 18 till the end of 20. And I want to know, are we talking about not using that 18 million between the end of 18 and the end of 20?
No, because that's, a lot of that is
I'm
bond
not
money.
following you.
Okay, so on this sheet, where are we talking? I want to be able to follow the train of thought.
You see what she's saying? So what the bottom line number is including a CIP, utility CIP money, right? So she's asking, and I'm with her on this, is she's asking which colors, which blocks should we be looking at for the biennium? We shouldn't really be talking about CIP stuff, right? We should be looking at general fund expenses and general fund revenues, right, Jim?
Yeah, so if you look up at where the orange color, total general funds,
Oh, the very top,
the very top, the row
Okay.
called total general funds, plus I'm suggesting that we also add to it the fund called 101.
the fund called I had,
Just right here.
I'm sorry, it's a light orange or pinkish color.
The street maintenance fund.
101?
Yeah, so it's the fifth one down. It's the street maintenance fund.
Oh, I see, okay.
Bob, did you want to say something?
No, I was, Councilmember Shepherd's asking about the estimated beginning fund balance for 2019 of 48 million, it draws down to 33 million. If you're asking what's the major difference there, it is the capital, the utilities funds, the projects. That's a $13 million difference there alone, so that covers the.
She got the direction. She
Got
was
it.
looking at on all this
All
massive
right.
thing. Where should we be looking? It's really only the top box.
All right.
Suggestion that 101 comes
The top box in 101.
All right.
Councilmember Mayhew, if I could clarify, are you suggesting putting that entire number back in there or just the operations portion of street maintenance fund? I mean, there's the operational
I
component
believe
of
that
it, staff and personnel, then there's capital excellence.
Yeah, I believe that Fund 101 is, could you move to the slide for streets?
This is purely operational
Environmental
stuff.
sustainability fund is there.
That's purely.
I believe that this,
Services
if you
fund
look,
is here.
if you look here, the total of the FY19 on the screen, you see it's 1184376. That's the same number in Fund 101 for expenditures, 1184376. So I believe this slide just equals Fund 101.
Gotcha.
It does, but I guess my question to council is if you move that back into the general fund, so you would not permit or you would not allow the 150,000 transfer from REIT for the capital?
Oh, we very well might.
Okay, you might.
Yes,
But again, I
that's
guess
the
the
discussion we
question
need to
is,
have.
Or the gas tax or the waste fee.
That's right, all of
back on
those.
reducing the rest of the general fund, I think this,
Well,
we're going to need
Or
guidance.
or a reserve fund that was built up over a few years specifically for this purpose.
Another debate. Perhaps, that's the discussion I think we need to go through.
Right. Councilmember Lissay.
Yeah, I think we're getting too granular, because if you're trying to oversimplify by saying it's just the orange section plus 101, it's not. Because the hotel motel tax fund is a part of the operating expenditures. The human services fund is part of operating expenditures. The environmental sustainability fund is part of operating expenditures. So you can't just oversimplify and say, oh, we're just going to take the orange and add the 101. Because fund number 16, 15, 14, 12, 11, 110, those are all part of that. I'm not really sure if the other ones are or not. So I think we're oversimplifying, trying to say, we're just gonna move that up there and do it. I think what we've got is we need to see, and this will happen, it won't happen during this meeting, but I think we need to see what it looks like by taking streets and adding it to here,
To where?
to this table. What happens when you add streets back into this table and add the funding for streets into the revenues? That's what I don't see. So it's not about the funds, it's about
And if,
operating
and if you add the funding,
and expenditures.
and if you have the funding as proposed by the administration or my budget, it would include the gas tax, the waste management fee, the 750,000 or 700,000 fund balance.
We would move the
specifically for
fund
streets
balance
that was
back
built
into
up,
the general fund.
and $150,000 in rate. So the question would be, of those funding sources, did you want to debate any of those? In which case, if one of those was pulled out, or to Councilmember Mayhew's point, if you wanted to pull out the $700,000+ that was saved up over the few years for this purpose, then it does leave us having to cut from the operational budget. Councilmember Mayhew?
I don't know how to say. I don't believe in anything that I've read that any fund balance was saved up to be used in 2019. I don't believe that's a thing that happened. you're saying that the council saved up money in prior years to spend in 2019?
That's what we're proposing. It's up to council.
But that's not
debate
what
it.
happened in the past.
Well,
That's a
I'm-
proposal now.
I'm not
That's not
certain,
something that
Jim. My
happened in
memory's
the
a little
past.
vague on it, but I just know we had debates when we were trying to figure out how to fund the reconstruction of all the streets downtown. At the same time, we knew that if we plowed all the money there, right behind it was going to come a bunch of streets now coming up to their first maintenance cycles on the ridge. So similar to parks, I do think there was a kind of direction to, like we had all these little buckets that you've found where we sort of tucked and said, here, throw a bunch of money here, throw a bunch of money there for these specific liabilities that were coming up on the horizon. And so I think there was some intent of the
Yeah, that's the
council.
point. No, I think I'm agreeing with you, Mayor. What I'm saying is, the intention was to spend it on those things. Let's not spend it on operations. Let's spend it on those types of things. That's my concern.
Oh, I'm sorry, and that's where maybe I'm getting myself a little confused because I keep mixing up the streets maintenance fund operations with the street capital, even if it's ongoing capital overlays.
So if we just, I don't know if it's my turn.
I see what you're saying. So you don't want a fund like that being used on ongoing operations. Like-
That's my point.
Like personnel and people, you're saying put those in personnel and people fund. Don't be using a fund that was intended to actually fix a street, be that $100,000 to pay a bid that is one to do the actual grind and overlay.
Right, let's use it to actually fix streets, and maybe we didn't specify which streets, but let's grind and overlay streets with that money. That's, but to give you an example, because I think there's some concern about how this would go, this discussion would go. So if we just take the example that was given for funding 101, 253 solid waste, 311 gas tax, 150 from REIT, and 400 using some fund balance, okay? So I'm suggesting let's not use fund balance. So that would imply that we got to find another 400 to cover, right? And I think this is what finance director is getting at. Are you saying you're going to cut 400 expenses? And so my thought is, well, let's take this 427 of, here it is, 425,000 of contingency. Now, I know it's in a different fund.
Where are you? I'm not with you.
I don't know where I am. I don't know how to answer that.
Just in his mind.
Oh, all right. Well, I'm trying to find it and I don't know where we're at.
Well, these were numbers that were given to us verbally in this meeting, so I wrote them down when they were said.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So this was what we were told, and so my point that I was trying to make is, maybe we don't need, we've not in the past funded a contingency. It's not something that's been in the budget before. It's 425,000. The point of a contingency is to say, we may have things we haven't thought of. It's a 2-year biennial budget, for heaven's sakes. There may be things we haven't thought of. Let's budget some money for those for when they come up. Any decent finance director will absolutely recommend that into your budget. It's entirely sensible that this has been proposed, but here's my point. I don't want to fund that out of fund balance. So my point would be, maybe we cover this 400 by saying, let's knock out this funding of this contingency. We have reserves. Let's not fund this contingency, perhaps, and then we don't need this 400 of fund balance. So I think there are ways to work through big chunks, perhaps.
We've also built
And get there.
contingencies into every department budget, have we not?
We have in most cases. Now, back to the intention of the contingency, and this is where I'm just providing this advice for what it's worth to council. That contingency was the mayor's discretion. And so part of that was mayor's discretionary funds, meaning he would be the one to make those determinations. So you take his power away from him if you eliminate that contingency to do so.
No, just like, take a police department, for example, there's like, how much of a contingency, we were getting away from
We removed
appropriating
all
the
those.
entire general fund. And but we were kind of warning that the council's used it over the years, particularly in a fast-growing, changing city. There's just things you're not going to anticipate, whether it's 5, 6 months from now or 2 years from now, that you're going to want to say, gosh, we'd like to fund that. And then you always sort of dipped into the reserves and you didn't have to amend the budget because you already appropriated the whole thing. So we've instead built contingencies in each budget to give you that same flexibility, but had it into specific buckets. So you built contingencies into each budget.
Mayor,
And
We did, no, we did not. There hasn't
The
been.
general fund, for the general, we put all the contingency for the entire general fund.
Into that 2.5%.
25, yes.
Okay, so there's no, so you're taking that flexibility away then if you sweep that up, then there's nothing in the individual budgets.
It goes back to, this is a good example, when the leadership, Issachar leadership at East Side came up and we didn't have that extra money. This contingency would give the mayor the discretion to use money for something like that came up in pretty much citywide, in any department.
Well, give me the discretion to come back to council and say, hey, you could use this
But that,
for.
right, for that proposal, but that discretion would be taken away. And again, because we're limiting the appropriations by department, departments could not go over, and the mayor could not go over, non-departmental could not go over in that case, the way the way the new ordinance is written.
Councilor Ross and then Councilor Sunwell.
So is this the first time you've built in contingency? You haven't done it before,
Right.
last year or the previous year?
No, and one thing I wanted to touch on really fast, if you can enlighten me for just a moment, is the fact that when we looked at certain operations in the city, the one thing we looked at was what we budgeted in 18, what we budgeted in 17, and what we're actually spending in each department. And what we determined was there were some budgets that were never budgeted correctly to begin with, and there was a lot of amendments after the fact. Streets was a good example of that. If I was here 2 years ago, without a doubt, I would tell you we would have had to increase our expenditures back then, and we wouldn't have set aside as much money as we did into that fund. We would have already spent it. So the question that we're just willy-nilly spending fund balance, that's incorrect. That's something that we deeply analyzed. How much money do we need? And yes, in 2-3 years, we definitely have an insolvency problem there. But the reason we're spending that fund balance now is it frankly should have been spent for those purposes in the previous years.
Councilmember Sunwell and Councilmember Lissay.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, Councilmember Mayhew, but I think the contingency thing is a good idea. It's entirely possible that at the beginning of next year, we would, after debating what fund balances and fund sources we should use to fund things like streets, we could come back and say that actually we would like $400,000 to come from that. I think what we're saying is right now, in the next 5 days, right, to get a balanced budget budgeted, that one way to bridge that $400,000-ish dollars is to vanquish that discretionary income for now until we can have a lengthier conversation, really a philosophical conversation about how we want to fund things in the future. And we could come out of that conversation in January and February and say, yeah, we want to put that $400,000 back in discretionary, right? Because we've agreed that funding streets now and in the future should come from some percentage of REIT or whatever. But we don't have time to have that conversation now. In an effort to balance the budget, $400,000 of, call it discretionary, call it slush fund, call it whatever you want, is an easy target in the very near term to come to an agreement on a budget that we already know we're going to dive into again in January. And I think that's what's being suggested. And if that's the case, that makes sense to me, given we have 5 days.
Just for advisement, the one challenge to that, just for advising the council, and is that Bob Sturbank's recommendation to do that, to come back, you would need a supermajority to pass that appropriation. And that holds true for each of the funds. If you came back for an increase after the budget is passed, you would need a supermajority.
Which is 5?
5.
Correct. Councilor Lissay.
Yes, and yes, and yes, and I think a yes, and I haven't heard from Bob yet. I think we're heading in the right direction. I'd like to close the conversation on streets operations, though, so, because we've kind of been jumping around. I'm hearing that we want to put street operations back into, we'll call it the operating budget. To do that, I did some math, which is dangerous, because I draw lines for a living. By adding the 1.184 million of street operations for 2019 back into the expenditures, that increases that to 19.319 million, which is a delta then on, that's not now, so I'm getting to this, Robert, so you'll see where I'm headed. Using our current revenue number of 18 million, 18.1, That's a delta of 1.160499 expenditures over revenues. So the number you gave us earlier of, for streets annually, that was not fund balance, that was just REIT availability, was about I wrote down 714, but I think you said 750, roughly 750 a year. So if we as a council said, okay, we got about $750,000 a year, I think Mr. Larson said the same thing. Even in a downturn, we should have about $750,000 a year available in REIT to pay for these items. I didn't do the math, but that converts that 1.16 negative to minus 750, what do we got, 400 and change? There's your contingency. Take the contingency out, and we've got, the dollars are there to cover 2019 without having to cut any other enhancements, basic services, services and supplies, all the things we've got in there. I think that's where I'd like to, let's talk about 2019, and then we can finish 2020, because I think that the answer to 2020 is better, because 2020 is only a delta of 902. So you throw the 750 in there, you've got a contingency in.
It's not 750 anymore.
Well,
The math doesn't work.
Okay, well,
But we could
whatever,
go into it.
but we could go into it, and let's figure out if we're already there. I think we can close that discussion real quickly and know that we're gonna be okay with streets being in there.
What you said is what I was trying to say.
Why
You
didn't
just said
say
it better.
Wow. Now you're just being flattering.
Group hug.
Jim gets a pony. Does that make sense?
So to sum it up,
To sum it up, if we account for the revenues, if we put the street operations into the operating expenditures table, the orange one,
right,
in order to cover for that, we have to have revenues to pay for it. So those revenues would come from two sources. First source is REIT of about $750,000.
It's,
So you would want
It's-
REIT paying for operations, personnel operations?
sorry, let me tell you the number. That 714 comes from 250 of solid waste fee.
Right,
311 of gas tax, and only 150 of REIT.
right.
And the reason what he's trying to say about the 150 of REIT,
Streets capital maintenance REIT, that's what I'm going at.
yes, so the 150 of the REIT, the reason he's saying that he's comfortable with that is because, as city administrator already said, there's a number of, I want to say 300 is what you said, that there was a number that north of 150 that he was comfortable was recurring. And so he's sort of teeing off of that and saying that 150 of it seems
Yeah,
reasonable.
I'm going off of what we had in the REIT changes here.
Right.
Specifically for streets capital maintenance, 150. So it's what was just said. I didn't write down what each bucket was from, but only 150 is from REIT. The other one's 250 was the,
250 from solid waste fee and 311 from gas tax.
right. Then, so to finish the summary, sorry, Sean. Then the other 425 that we need to get to zero that out, to be balanced, is the contingency that we just discussed in the non-departmental budget.
so it's getting rid of the contingency.
It's getting rid of the contingency. We can always put it back in later when we're looking at the services and programs and things that we're gonna do in the spring. But to get an operating budget in place, you don't need that contingency.
Okay, I was going to go to Bob Larson and then back to Councilmember Sunwall, and then I was requested for a quick recess or like a 1-minute break. City Director or Finance Director wanted to do a sidebar. Bob?
I just want to clarify, if everybody wants to look at the row 101, Street Maintenance Fund,
Which part, which are you?
right here.
101.
I'm sorry, yeah, the proposed fund schedule, sorry. Page
Exhibit
page
74.
Page 3, I've been looking at it all night, I'm sorry. Page 3. So we have estimated expenditures in 2019 of $1.184 million. We've got estimated revenues of $714,500.
That's as
The
a-
delta if you will, is $470,000. So we got to, what I understand, I'm not saying there's a concurrence from council, but it appears that there's a lean towards wanting to cover that, put it all back into the, what I'll call the general operating expenditures, and then find the way to cover that difference without using ending fund balance or beginning fund balance and or reserves. I guess reserves is the more likely one. And we could take that out of the, most of it out of the contingency that was being proposed by the mayor. We still have to find about, I think, $50,000 to get the difference. If you want to really just
Oh, don't-
offset it with revenues.
Don't forget the 38,000 you need to find for the 0.5% as well, so.
That's already been factored in.
That's already in there.
Don't be
Yeah.
bitter.
0.5%'s in there, that's what I asked early on.
The revenues it should
What
be.
did you take out?
A sharpened
Oh,
pencil.
excuse me, I see what you're saying. So there's $38,000 that you're asking council to also reduce to cover that difference.
I asked that question earlier, that's it, yeah, I was asked that specifically, the property tax question.
I
is-
know, I just want to know what was it that was taken out to equal $38,000? Hey, what?
The tree, you took out the tree something or other.
No,
So
we
perhaps
didn't.
you misunderstood Councilmember Lasay's question. It hasn't been taken out. The
It's not.
38,000 was not taken out.
Is not.
So we have to take 38,000 out of this too. Councilmember Sunwell.
What's the point of asking a question?
So, if the way you explain that, Councilmember Lasay, I believe is still a slight departure from practice in that we are now using anything north of $0 of REIT is a departure. However, what I recognize it as is a compromise at this point, understanding that in the future, we are going to need to recognize some portion of REIT as consistent revenue, just like we do the gas tax, just like we do sales tax. And so I think we know we're probably heading in that direction. This is $150,000 that we've, and if to balance it, it needs to be 200 whatever, right? But it's a small enough amount of money that it still allows us to have a lengthier philosophical question in January to figure out how do we pay back the 400,000 discretionary? Do we pay it back? Because we'll have that conversation about how much do we want to be pulling out of REIT? What do we want to use fund balance for? And so so just that $150,000 is a departure from what we've done in the past. And I just think it's a compromise to get us to a point so that on Monday, we can have a balance because we are right there. And this is exactly what I talked about when I said I'm a red. Whatever line items, I want it to match up with the right funding sources, and you've got me.
All right, I'm going to take a quick minute break to caucus with the finance director and the city administrator, and then I'll come back to Councilmember Mayhew and Shepherd.
All rise.
Jim.
Is there a pencil sharpener back there?
Am I making sense?
So beginning fund.
Am I-
Just came about it.
And then revenues.
I went in a different direction.
There's probably $30,000 to $50,000 difference.
All right, if we could continue.
So what'd you guys decide?
Robert, do you want to speak to some of the concerns yet, or?
So we're going to go ahead and there's a couple things here. We need about approximately $88,000. And so we did have some.
Wait, $88,000 after we kill the contingency?
Yes.
Right?
Oh, okay.
If I could
The
just.
delta between the
Can
difference.
you explain that math? Because that's, we have like 20
We have
here.
a different number here, yeah.
I was adding up the street maintenance fund, the 101 fund on page 3.
Okay.
That difference, if you take just the estimated revenues 2019 from the estimated expenditures, you're at a $470,000 difference.
I have a 445, I get to 445.
No, not these two numbers.
750.
I did 714.
714 and 1184 is,
I did 714, 500.
Might want to break out some calculators, guys.
469, 875.
Or a
That should be
whiteboard.
$470,000, yeah.
Did
Yeah.
I draw lines for a living, guys, you know?
So
playing the-
that's
playing
the
the
first
Brian rule.
piece. What you have in the contingency proposed from the mayor is
Wait, did we agree on the
$426,000.
426.
Do we agree on a number yet?
That
Means
426?
$44,000.
correct.
So
And then that,
we're talking $70,000 then?
add to that, though,
Okay.
the mayor's proposal was to take the full 1%. Council agreed to do half of that. So we add another $38,000 that he's asking for council to either reduce the expenditures. That's the 0.5% on the property tax.
So let me ask the question again. At the beginning of the meeting, I asked, on the projected 2019 line, under property tax, we show 8.18, let's me say the numbers, $8,111,537. I asked the question, is that the 0.5%? The answer I got was yes.
No,
It's not the increase. That's just what we're projecting as far as total assessed values increase over the next year.
So
the,
That's with the, including the half cent. Or, sorry, the 0.5%.
so that includes the 0.5%.
Yes, yeah.
If I
So
could
there's
just-
no
35,000.
30,000 to put back in?
if I could just clarify, the 2019 projected $8,111,000 is the half 1%.
Right.
The projected 2020, we said, included a full 1%.
Right, I understand that.
Okay.
I'm staying away from 2020 because I think we can get there by just doing 2019, because the
Right.
revenue increase on its own
Right.
outside of that is greater anyway.
Right, but when the mayor asked, it's up to council to decide how you want to do this, but when the council wanted to go with just a 0.5%, it
Right.
left the budget, if you will, a shortfall of roughly half of that 1%, which is 38 and change, $38,000.
Does the 8.1 million include $38,000 or not include $38,000?
It does.
It does.
But the
Then there's no $38,000 to take out of anywhere. This is the money that we're expecting.
These are
for
the
property tax.
revenues.
Right.
And you haven't cut a $38,000 expenditure out of the expenditure. We balanced the budget.
Bob, with all respect, if the 0.5% is included in this $8 million number, if I cut $38,000 out, then you have 0% in the $8 million
Let
number.
me put it a different way. We had expenditures equaling the total revenues, which included the 1% of $77,000. Council decided to go with the 0.5%, which
Right.
reduced the revenues by $38,000.
But this number, this got better between last meeting.
But we didn't cut an equivalent $38,000 from the expenditure side. We showed a number of
But
different.
we don't need to if this got better.
You can use the fund balance and you could, excuse me, some of the reserves or potentially the ending fund balance to do that, but
I'm sorry, yeah, I'm not buying it. If 8.111,537 includes 0.5%, which I'm told by the finance director includes the 0.5% increase, there's nothing to take out.
But they're talking about expense, that's the revenue line.
Right, there's.
The revenue's bigger than the
I don't
expense.
care about the expenses. I'm talking about, I'm calculating revenue and expenses separately. I'm subtracting and adding separately.
all right.
I have,
What I'm gathering from that then is that we'll balance the budget by taking something out of reserves, $38,000, do that. That was the mayor's proposed budget. It had revenues and expenditures
Can we
balanced.
go to the revenue slide? Can we just go to the revenue slide?
Yeah.
I don't disagree that there needs to be something taken out. We're still not there.
Let's
I agree with that.
just do facts.
Don't know
Look,
what the number is yet.
18,158. 18,158 already has the 0.5% taken out. 18,1, go to the next slide. 18,134 is a smaller number.
Yeah, it's all,
I just again point out, under the 001 fund, council decided to break it out by, I'll call it activities. So you have administrative department, Snoqualmie Police Department, those are all limited. We cannot spend 1 penny more than what's listed on this sheet. But somewhere in there, there's an additional $38,000 that is in this expenditure total. Now,
I don't get it.
I get the point being made, Bob. If the 38,000 is still in there, then that should be going over budget by $38,000. It's not, the 18,134. So what you guys did some trimming in
Yeah,
various
because-
budgets over the last few days.
Yeah,
and
you
some-
guys came back with smaller budgets. You guys did some more pencil sharpening since we met last. You said that. You didn't identify where.
You must have done enough pencil sharpening to.
those are not in the general fund.
There was a difference in the salary. So the salary compensation that we approved tonight was lower than what was in the budget.
I understand. It could be semantics, but what the mayor's trying to say is that if you want to reduce the total revenues, you have to reduce the expenditures at equivalent amount. If you want to say you're actually balancing the budget of what he proposed.
Let me take a different run at this. So close, to quote Brian, I don't want to see your file system. Sorry. He's not even here to appreciate that. So if we go to the slide that is hidden right now, okay, well, that's small. Okay. One before it. The revenue side. Try it again. 18,158 for revenues includes 0.5%, not 1%, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So our goal is to have a budget that isn't red. Okay. Next slide, 18,158 is larger than 18,134 by 50 whatever thousand dollars, right?
well, 20,000,
20, whatever. So isn't that a balanced budget? What am I missing?
It is. It doesn't include streets.
Right. So we add streets in.
And we've agreed to fund streets
We're going to
through.
fund streets through the source, through 714,500. We're gonna also use then, we're gonna remove the contingency from the non-departmental budget. That gets us to a 20,428 expenditures above revenues.
Gets us to 1.14.
It gets us too much.
So we're 44,000 short.
I'm gonna just throw the proposal out there.
Wait, how much did you say, Sean?
We're right back to where we were. 714,
No, he thinks we're 20,000 short. How much do
It's
you
pretty
think?
close.
we're
It's-
44,000 short, right back where we were.
Yeah,
Which you
44
identified.
So the 44,
Yes.
if we have to find 38 or something,
Let's do
let's just
38.
work with that. Let's work with that. We're looking for 70, let's say we're looking for $70,000 then. 44 and 38 is,
Why aren't we just looking
because
for
we're not,
44?
because we need more time than just at this meeting to talk about numbers. Somebody needs to calculate it.
Let me offer this.
Need a whiteboard.
Mayor asked us to defend that $38,000.
Let's-
He's indicating that.
let's keep it.
We'll stand down. We're at $44,000. We gotta fund the difference between the 1.184 million for the street maintenance fund, and we have $714,000 in revenue.
All right, I'm
If you
gonna-
want- If you want to use a contingency, you're gonna come up still short by about $44,000.
Right, you know how we're gonna do that? Mr. Hoffman,
No. I know where you're going with this.
Don't call him out, just say, just do it, just do it.
what if we, instead of allocating $200,000 towards the affordable housing, initial affordable housing work, it was $150,000. Can we still accomplish our goal of coming to a solution to what we need to do?
Yes.
I was gonna say, in the spirit of what council asked for earlier, we're gonna stand down and let council debate this. You two come up with what you want to do with it, tell us what you want to do, and we'll make the changes.
Yeah, so that was my recommendation is while that 200,000 is a big fat target, I would like the experts in the room to shave the 44,000 bucks. You guys come back to us and tell us, rather than us dictate.
I
that it's-
support shaving the affordable housing to 150.
Oh, but that might be your recommendation. I'm just saying,
Recommendation.
okay, should we vote?
So there-
Oh, we can't.
Mark?
Well, hold on. I think that almost completely solves it. The only question I think we have to ask up and down is there any other things we want to look at? Because if not, I think we're there. Are there any other things we want to look at?
I don't think we have to.
I do want to step back and, the concern Robert wanted to bring my attention.
In an undisclosed location?
Well, I told him not, we're not going to blow it up, because what he was suggesting was, per your suggesting, Councilor, maybe in the support of the council, was on the general fund, was having that proviso to break out those departments under general funds. So when the council approves the budget, it limits the administration in terms of how it can move those monies around. By having that contingency there, when there are things that kind of blow up during the year, you have the ability to move the monies around between the department. Without the contingency, it's much more of a straitjacket. So he was suggesting, should we roll up those departments again and just put it back to where it was before, where it's just a general fund and you appropriate the general fund?
What method
I
gives you
was
the most
I was
flexibility?
suggesting, no, that would probably be a big step backwards and blow up the conversation. But I want the council going in eyes wide open, knowing that you do have to stand a greater risk as things come up throughout the next year, that you might be doing budget amendments with supermajorities. So, Councilmember Sunwell and then Councilmember Mayhew.
So here's what I will say. I shouldn't say it's my final comment, because it probably won't be. But what I think you've seen here is perhaps more agreement on the city council than you have ever seen on any issue.
So don't break it.
And I think what that also bodes well for in the future, which is, the future is called January, is that when we come back and revisit how we want to use revenues and fund balance, yeah, we'll need a supermajority. But what I think you see from all 6 of us here tonight is a willingness to have that conversation. And for all I know, you may get that 400,000+ back. I don't, we're not pulling that back because we don't think you should have it. It's just it happens to align super well. We don't want to get in the weeds of telling you can have 18 cars instead of 20.
And I absolutely appreciate that, and I hope you appreciate it. I'm not telling you that I'm alarmed about it. I just want you going eyes wide open, knowing that it's going to be as problematic for you, perhaps more so than it will be for us, or it'll, if changes come up, you won't have as much flexibility initially. But I appreciate what you're saying, Councilmember Sunwell, because I think as we get into these strategic and sort of policies and fiscal policies and strategies, that I'm confident you're going to realize how you need to provide for yourself those different tools and mechanisms. And, I'm looking forward to that conversation, I guess, at the retreat and in the future. Councilmember Mayhew.
So I want to bring this up to the council because there's one thing that I wish was different in our budget. And I just want to get a sense of whether there's support for this. If there isn't, okay. But I just want to bring it up, which is when we talked about the human services budget, we talked about the fact that for $35,000 extra, we could fully fund the requests that the Human Services Committee was willing to recommend. There's I think 1 or 2 that they had said they didn't recommend funding, but we could fully fund if we could find another 35,000. And I would really like to see us do that and find another 35,000 somewhere to allow us to do that. And I want to see if there's a sense of whether you guys are willing to do that or not. Not, I understand, but I just want to bring that up and suggest that maybe we want to find a way to do that.
That's about equal to 0.5%, isn't it?
That has been apparent to me the whole time.
So Peggy brought up 2 or 3 days ago, the last council meeting, hey, let's talk about that affordable housing study. And I would continue to keep trimming it down to include that so that we can make it work.
I'd be in favor of that.
Because
Yeah.
Home up and out.
Peggy has in mind another service that she thinks would be less
Lot
expensive.
less. Arch.
I think,
You got to put money. You got to put money into ARCH too, and you need a study to determine if that's your best option. But yeah.
what's that, again?
Councilmember Lassay. Oh,
What
I'm
did
sorry.
you say?
I said you need money to put into ARCH to be a participant in Arch, that money doesn't necessarily stay in your but I think a study will help you determine if that is one of your best options, but you can't sweep it all away.
Right.
Yeah. Councilman Lasay? And then Councilman Ross.
In my profession, I work with Arch, I've worked with Dash, I've worked with Seattle Housing Authority, I've worked with King County Housing Authority, worked with a number of different organizations that promote affordable housing. Those organizations will do a great job of promoting affordable housing. They won't do a study for you. They will collect your money, they will help you plan it, they will help you organize it, they will help you create it in a way that makes sense for your community. They will provide a tremendous amount of value. No one's saying that we're not going to do that. What we're saying is we don't know what car we want to buy. Why would we hire someone that's going to make us a Toyota when we don't know what car we want? I think as a council, we need to do more. It's more than a study. We keep focusing on this thing called a study. There is a study portion. There is analysis. There is data research. There are 3 or 4 more things I can't remember because we've talked about it too many times and I've got too many things in my head. It's not a study for the price and the cost that we've budgeted for. It's much more than that. Dash will be a great organization to bring into the conversation. There are several others that we will want to incorporate once we get to that point. We got to start somewhere first, though. So I agree. They can participate. They can be a part of it. They can help. But we need a budget to do that. If we allocate $40,000 for Dash, then we've got even less to do the work that we need to do to even know where we want to start. That's my observation from my practical work experience. Every organization in the private business world that I work with always underestimates the cost of what it takes to do this kind of work. And then they try to cut corners. I don't want us to do that. We owe our citizens more.
So are you saying you want to take another 34,000 out of there or not for the human services?
I'd love to, but I don't know. Can we, I mean, again, we're just taking a guess. And what's going to happen is we go, let's say we go to $120,000. So we've now taken 80,000 out of there so we can do human services and cut the difference. Mark comes back to us at the end of 2019 and says, I need another $60,000. Where do we get it at? Where does it come from? It comes from fund balance, which we don't want to touch.
Let me.
It's not in the 20 budget.
Let's put it in.
Well, that's a good point. We haven't talked about
Yeah,
that.
I'm going to do Councilmember Ross and Shepherd next. And before I go to you, Councilmember Ross, let me
Good point.
just do a check-in because I said earlier I was going to do a quick check. Councilmember Mayhew suggested a sort of brand-new initiative he threw on the table, which was, hey, can you guys consider throwing in another 34,000 to the human services to make up for the gap that we couldn't fund, given what was originally budgeted? Can I take a poll real quick as to whether you want to continue discussing that? And if there's a majority that's interested in continuing that, again, for the sake of time, then we'll continue. So like if I could see a poll of hands of those that want to continue that discussion?
Tonight?
Tonight.
Can.
Okay, and those that are disinterested or do not want to continue this discussion?
No, I want to continue.
And those that are neutral? Okay, so it seems like there's strong interest. Councilmember Ross and Councilmember Shepherd.
So I'm fine with increasing it, but I don't want to at the expense of affordable housing, because we don't know what the costs are
Okay.
going to be, so I don't want to reduce.
Any
affordable
other
housing.
suggestions?
No,
All right.
not yet.
Councilmember Shepherd.
So earlier this year, I did talk probably for about 20 minutes with the representative from Arch. And before contacting Arch, I was looking into what is considered best practice throughout the country. And it seems like Arch is recognized throughout the country as being, and Redmond as being one of the, and Arch handles Redmond's affordable housing. So I feel that in our area, Arch does a good job. But in my conversation with the Arch representative, he did talk about the need to do an inventory, and that would be the first step, to find out what existing housing would be considered affordable and to understand how many homes are affordable at what percentage of the median income. So when we had the AWC meeting here.
So just a quick point of order. I thought we were discussing human services, I thought that's what we had raised our hands to think we wanted to talk about.
Councilmember Shepherd, if we just did.
Not that it's not important, I just trying to keep us on track.
If you,
It is part of the thought
you're
process.
kind of making a pitch for a specific affordable housing agency. If you could just focus on the question of, do we want to, do you want to?
His estimate to me was 15,000 per year for our city to
Okay,
be a
so-
part of Arch. However,
So you're okay with taking another 35,000 out of the affordable housing budget right now, that's now down to 150, to
Right.
fund additional human services?
yes.
Is that your point?
Yes.
All right, great, thank you. Councilmember Mayhew?
So I think the way we can do this is we would lower the affordable housing, there it is, the affordable housing 200,000, which, as you point out, we've lowered to 150. So we'd lower it to, I guess,
100.
115?
115, yeah.
115. But what we would do, I would suggest, is we then increase the 2020 affordable housing, put that missing 85 into 2020, cut, so that what we're doing is, over the biennium, we're still spending the 200,000. We just, in order to fund human services, we, in 19, we moved some of the affordable housing money that we're setting aside into 20 instead of 19.
I think that was already the plan, to spend about 30 to 40,000 in 2019, with the idea that the right balance would be more toward implementation.
It was based on a best-case scenario of if everything went well and the entire activity took place in 1 year, being that there's 7 council goals, and that being a major one, we thought we'd get started right away, best case, but the fallback was that whatever portion remained would go to 2020,
Could you,
including the comp plan element.
I missed, you made a comment about it returning to 200,000. Could you repeat that again?
Right, so what we're talking about doing tonight as part of this plan is to lower the affordable housing budget. We've already discussed moving it from 200, in 2019, moving it from 200,000 to 150,000.
I think it was 200 over the biennium, correct, Mark? It's for the full biennium of 19 and 20.
It's a 2-year budget, but the way we plugged it in was 200,000 in 2019.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So we've already moved it down by 50. What I'm suggesting is we move it down to 115 in 19, but in 2020, add 85. So we get back to the 200, but we just do it in 20.
Where are you going to come up with 85 then?
The balance already, but
It
the budget
already
already
balances
balances.
out. When you add, so in 2020, we've now got a street operations expenditure added in of 1.214. Under revenues, though, if you look at fund balance on Fund 101, the revenues estimated for 2020 was 914,500, not 714.
Are you guys following this?
So we do have our concerns, especially towards the gas tax. There is a reason why we've got Fund 101 in existence, for example, and that's because the gas tax is a restricted revenue source. And as a result, it's required by us, by the state auditor, to essentially keep that within the 100 series for the most part. So there is a risk if we do move that gas tax revenue into the general fund, that we could be receiving a management letter or who knows what when the state auditor comes to review our work.
I'm asking Robert to pull up that slide we had last budget meeting that had, the menu of things you could pull monies from too. Councilmember Mayhew.
So the requirement from the state, the requirement over the use of special revenue funds, you can meet this very easily by simply taking the gas tax into Fund 101 and then immediately transferring it out. That you do not have to do the accounting the way that we're doing Fund 101. The purpose of the accounting is to establish that we have spent restricted revenues on the restricted purpose, and you do not need to move the expenditures into the fund. In fact, we have many other funds that are special revenue funds where we move the revenue through and the expenditures actually in a different fund. So this is, there's a very real concern that's being brought up, but our accountants can handle this.
Yeah, I'm not, I hope you guys are tracking what they're saying. I didn't track the path you guys follow, but it sounds to me like you're blowing a hole somewhere else in order to put money back out of affordable housing.
No.
So,
No, because what we have is the delta we had in 2019, before we did all the funny math, The delta we had in 2019 was $24,000 in revenue versus expenditures.
On the positive side.
On the positive side. The delta in 2020 was $312,000 on the positive side. So we were already starting the projected 2020 $300,000 ahead.
Oh, and you're
So
saying
the
you could pull
discussions
some of that
about-
surplus into,
Right,
back
there's
into
a
the.
surplus, I mean, I don't want to call it
back into the
surplus, but
affordable
there's,
housing.
there's,
It is a
there's a buffer.
Once the study informs us, then if you choose, you could put that.
So what that is that's your, that's, I mean, that's the contingency.
So what's that got to do with the
So,
gas? or
doesn't matter
the-
which
or the-
fund.
Well, they're concerned about so when we pull, so we're kind of, we're not talking about the mechanics of doing this. We're saying, oh, pull these revenue sources. The issue is that there are some state requirements that the accountants have to attend to, which is to prove that we've used gas taxes for permissible purposes. Understand that we're spending 1.2 million on permissible sources.
But the surplus of 300,000+ you were talking about in 2020 isn't tied to the gas tax, it's everything.
No, but they're just raising the concern that
raising the concern.
because you guys, they're saying, hey, guys, you're using 311 and you're putting it back into the general fund, just understand that we're gonna have to do some accounting around that. And the answer is fine, do your accounting, but it still can end up back in Fund 1,
I
like
think,
we're
I
saying.
think we'll be okay.
All right.
I would just prefer to have the senior accountant really review the proposal in comparison to that, because I can read the BAR's manual right now, and so I do have, still maintain my concerns at the moment.
All right.
So let's do that. We've got time for that to happen. Let's make sure the accountants are okay with
I
it.
just want to make sure you guys captured all that. If everybody's fine, you're fine with
I
that?
appreciate you have concerns.
Yes.
I'd be concerned if you didn't have concerns.
Bob
okay.
Survey?
Well, I may not be quite tracking what's being proposed to be done with 101, if it's going to be swept out of the special revenues and into the general fund. Where will it be spent in a way that the
So let me-
the constitutional
Yeah,
purposes
it's a
can be
great
tracked?
question. We were kind of just talking about it over here. I'd suggest, folks, that what we do is that we leave the beginning fund balance in 101, just leave it there. Because of the concerns that I think you guys have as accountants, you're gonna have to make sure that that tracks through to permissible purposes. I suggest that what we do is we move the revenues that are in 101 and the expenditures in 101 for 19 and 20, move those up to Fund 1. Leave the fund balance where it is until we've had the bigger fund balance discussion. Plus, as part of that fund balance discussion, you'll let us know if there's some restrictions on that particular bucket, just like the many other buckets
That's
that
the
might have
400
restrictions.
some odd thousand
Jen-
dollars you're talking
No,
about?
no, there's about $1 million
Million,
bucks
just
of
Oh,
over
fund
the general
balance.
fund balance, okay. I thought
No,
you were
no,
talking
no,
about the
no.
one
In
time.
Fund
101.
101,
Street maintenance fund.
Yeah.
Fund 101 has an opening fund balance of over $1 million.
Right.
So that what we're talking about here is we're not going to touch that $1 million. We're just going to take the revenues and expenditures and move that up to Fund 1.
Should be okay.
And you want that fund balance more toward those one-time capital?
No,
Yes, but more importantly, it has to be spent in conformance with the
Right.
law, and they're going to need to track that through.
But you want it to, I mean, you
So,
don't want
but
it just
right-
sitting there, you're going to put it to work, I
Oh,
assume,
yeah.
with some capital
Oh, yeah.
projects. when we do it.
Absolutely.
eventually, yeah.
So they'll tell
could
us, like,
appropriate it,
these may be restricted to streets projects, so you can't use it for facilities, probably. They'll tell us,
Right.
many of those fund
Gen-
balances have particular.
Generally, yeah, I mean, generally speaking, without going into deep in the weeds, gas tax is limited to highway purposes. And so I'm looking at what we have listed here for Fund 1, and in considering the limitations that have been sort of the departmental type limitations that you've talked about, I'm trying to see here how the expenditures of gas tax would be consistent with the limitations coming on what's listed as Fund 1 purposes. Are there going to be street projects I mean, I don't see those here.
So the same expenditures that are in Fund 101 right now are going to move to Fund 1. So if they're not permissible, then they weren't permissible in 101 either. We're taking the exact same expenditures, which are permissible.
We can use gas tax on road maintenance.
Right, we
Which
can,
means-
those just aren't typically associated with what we're showing is listed under Fund 1, because Public Works is not
No, we're gonna,
not listed here.
we're gonna take the 101 and actually call it street maintenance and put it up above at the $1.184 million. Keep it separated.
Okay, so I just want to ask, so it sounds like everybody's on board. In 2019, affordable housing drops to a 115 number, and then we look at reallocating those monies, and if the survey or the studies inform us to refund that.
But we're going to add to the 2020 budget 85 grand for affordable housing for the 20 budget.
Oh, to go ahead and do that now?
We're doing that now.
To
yeah.
bring it back up
So
again.
you're not waiting for the results of the study?
Nope.
But in both
All right.
19 and 20, the human services, instead of, will fully fund human services in both, to the request amount. We'll need to do that by ordinance, because we did it as a agenda bill, didn't we? Or is it?
We didn't.
it hasn't
It's
been
part
on
of
yet?
this.
It's
We
part of the
didn't,
next,
yeah.
it's not
No.
part of the next meeting. so
No,
we
no, it's
could-
part of this budget. Just this budget will do it.
Oh, that's right, that's right, we gotta pull it out, that's right.
So
that'll be-
can I do a few cleanup items so I know we're getting some things kind of prepared for a vote next week? Do you want Robert to represent this with 101 in there for the final vote?
Yes,
Okay.
we'll do that.
Just to be clear, I wasn't sure if everybody's saying, no, we understand the numbers, just leave it as is. Okay, the human services allocation, if you're approving the extra 34, whatever and change, just so we have clear direction on what we're doing with that 34,000. And Jim, you were more tuned to this than the rest of us because you're liaison to that committee. Oh, and Carol was here earlier, but I assume it's going back to all those human service agencies and seeing which ones were underfunded, and that should add up to 35 or.
Yeah, there's a column that they have which
Where they
was-
didn't get the full request or full funding.
Right, there's a column which is,
Eric's retrieving that right now if you
Yeah.
want to wait just a moment.
Okay. And that's 35 for both years?
so if you just, if we just put it at 230, I think it's going to be 234 is the number off that, if I'm remembering correctly. So we just put it at 234 for both years.
Okay, so you're going to need an extra $64,000 or $68,000 is what you're, so we have to come up with another $34,000 if you want to fund both years. You have to do it for 19 and 20.
27 for
You should take it out of the
2019,
study.
And it's 234 for 2020.
So it goes up about
I
7,000
like
for
your thinking,
20.
Sean. Yeah.
So we
So
need,
you're going to need that amount, which you just said, like 35,000 for not just 19, but also for 20. So you'll need it
That's
closer to
okay,
70.
because we're starting with 20 with already at a $400,000.
Sean was suggesting just taking that 2020 figure out of the affordable housing.
Mayor, in 2020, they've got revenues exceeding
I was
expenditures
gonna
by
say, take
about
the bank.
$440,000. So we should be okay there.
We're starting with a greater,
$440,000 difference in revenues and expenditures. If I could just go back, if I could, under the street maintenance fund, we've resolved for 2019, I'm looking at 2020, and there's a $300,000 difference there between revenues and expenditures.
well, the revenues are
Well, to me, the
up.
two come together, human
It
services
still
and
works out
affordable
because
housing. It's-
of that
it's for
delta.
the same population,
And when you
if
put the
will.
operations in, or, the operations from 19 to 20 increase, but the revenue from 19 to 20 increases by a greater amount.
Right, but you're still going to be short $300,000 between the revenues and expenditures for 2020.
I don't see that.
It's 1.214 million versus
Yeah.
914,000.
If I add 1.214 to the 18,435, I get 19,650. If I add the 914 revenue to the 18,747, I get 19,662. So I have revenue of $12,000 more than expenditure.
I've been looking at this is page 3, as everybody's got, this is the more recent
Looking
one.
at this one.
Oh, we might need Robert.
I'm looking at the
that too.
totals that I've been given.
Matt, could you go over that again with Robert? No, he was looking at the human resources. Human
why don't
services.
you go photocopy it and then just look at it? Is the photocopier up?
Well, just go over the numbers. He's familiar with them. Just do it again. He wasn't able to pay, he wasn't paying attention because he was looking at the,
So what I've done is, using the numbers, using the big numbers, 914, 500.
Mayor, point of order, motion to extend the meeting?
you can wait till 10 if you want, but.
Oh, we're
you
good
wanna-
till 10?
You want to go past?
I thought we were only good at 9.
No, you have to
So,
do it for going past 10.
Thank you.
2020, 18.7, adding 914, I get to 19,662.
I thought we were already
If I take
Does
the,
anyone second this motion
Operation
to go
one.
past 10 o'clock?
I withdraw the motion.
which is the streets.
Yeah, that's right.
I get to 19,650.
That's right.
My revenue is greater than my expenditure. Because we started at a delta that was already greater than the previous year.
That's right.
TV
And
stuff
we
right
already
here.
had 200,000 coming from general funds.
This is Robert's, Robert's
Because we-
rules of
we'd
order.
already allocated that 200,000 in there. So that's where we don't need,
Robert,
we
how
don't
moves
need to
were-
do the other,
The most
you know,
recent
in essence,
order.
what that means is we get a couple extra, there's an opportunity then to increase, to do that $85,000 in 220 So the expenditure number goes up by 85
Not acceptable.
here. No.
I'm sorry, Jim, was I hearing that
This is
that
the
number to meet what
year.
you were proposing is 85,000 per year, not 35?
Because I brought it to their
Jim?
attention last year.
It's the that's what.
For affordable
that's
housing.
Really then what we do is the
Oh,
contingency
for
comes out
affordable
again.
housing. Oh, to bring the gap back, okay.
Again. So instead of being 12,000, it's 435,000. You had the 35 back in for the housing, for the human services. You had 85 in for that, and you're still
If I
ahead
have
by,
a
so
break, we can get these guys straightened out.
you're still ahead.
I'm not sure.
I guess, yeah.
I think we might be done in 5 minutes. I'm not sure if I want to take a 5-minute break, so I'm thinking we might be done in 5 minutes.
Please.
I can go do that.
Whiteboard.
So, welcome. What are you here for?
If you have any questions about human
He's a
services,
stand-up comic.
I'm here.
Eric,
What's the number per year to meet the unmet demand?
So it's, for 19, it would be about 34,000. For 20, it would be about 37,000.
Mayor, if I could clarify, or ask Eric to clarify, these are just for those organizations that are ready, were being recommended for funding.
Yes.
Does not include those folks that had been recommended for zero or no funding.
There was
I just
one,
want to make sure that's what the council is intending there, if that's what you're, okay.
Did you want to fund the ones that the committee was recommending?
No,
No, that's not what we're talking
We
about.
only wanted to fund the committee recommendation.
Okay, so we have.
but we want to fully fund the ones that the committee recommended funding for.
Okay, so if it comes up less than 34, you're fine with that?
It won't.
No, we have it.
15 of the 16 organizations, the Human Services Advisory Committee recommended funding.
All right.
The exception being North Bend Community Church, which had a $2,500
right.
recommendation.
All 15 will get full for what they asked for.
Okay, there are ones that
Take out 25.
the ones that the committee said, these are ones that we'd love to fund fully but couldn't, but the other ones were not. Okay.
right.
I just want to make sure we're coming back giving money to other agencies that the
No.
committee said we shouldn't
right.
fund these.
Nope, all we're doing is taking the committee's
Okay.
recommended organizations where they couldn't fund the whole request because they
Right.
didn't have enough money.
My only question to staff is, do you feel you have very clear direction on what the council's asking on these last-minute deliberations and shifting monies around?
Yes, we do.
If there's any vagaries or confusion, let's.
There's
clarify.
one vagary I'm worried about. I just want to make sure we fit correctly. So, Councilman Lissay, if you could help me. The 2020 contingency, have we taken that out or have we left it in?
We have to take some of it out. but
Okay.
There is an opportunity to have some contingency still
Oh,
there.
because it was 400,000 for
Because we
each.
were already ahead on the delta with revenue. and
Well, I
expenditure.
assume you were doing a similar formula for 2020 that you were doing for 2019.
You can do the same thing and have that money available for something.
Well, otherwise, we're spending the fund
I
balance
would put
down.
it, I would put it in the contingency.
I would take it out of the contingency, but that will
Take
still
what you
leave
have
a
to, but
fairly,
leave some
so,
contingency.
so balance us to the extent necessary by taking out of the 2020 contingency, but
I
that will
wanna make
still
sure- who's
leave a
taking-
fair
who's
amount of
taking notes
contingency.
because Robert's distracted.
You're still gonna leave a,
Okay,
Mr. Mayor,
James, you got it?
it's gonna be about $300,000 still in contingency for 2020.
And let's remember, we'll probably have had the contingency conversation figured out in the next 3 months.
Yeah.
Right? And that will be, because that'll be a philosophical discussion and one that we agree on as a principle of this council, that will go forward in perpetuity in whatever it is that we decide. And so not only is there a distinct possibility that 2019 gets funded to some degree back to what you wanted, but that would also carry forward into 2020 and beyond.
Just a
Officer Bank,
point of order, I know
Councilman.
these guys are taking notes, but there've been multiple conversations going on, and I think it would be helpful if,
We had some
if there's a motion made and seconded so that we get clear direction.
Can we do
rather
that?
I do have a comment on
Can we
human
do motions
services.
tonight or on budget decision? Councilman Ross?
So you included, though, in your total North Bend Community Church, and you already decided that you're not going to fund them. So you need to take out the 2,500 for each year.
He's got it. Definitely.
Right, but he still said it was 34,000, so
No,
it's
so it'll be less.
31,430, and, right, okay.
All right, plus or minus.
Councilman Jeans?
Perhaps in listening to all of this conversation, someone watching or reading the notes says, well, the city doesn't care about affordable housing. It's obvious they don't care because they've reduced their reserve, but that couldn't be further from the truth. It was an objective that we spent a lot of time on our objectives. It is our objective. We just, the amount of 200,000 is arbitrary, and if it's down to costing $100,000 to do something meaningful, then we still have enough money in to do it. If it turns out that we really need to spend 150 or 200,000 or whatever, I would think that we can have a discussion about that in January or February, and if need be, we'll get that supermajority that we need to take action on something that is important to us.
I would hope there'd be a supermajority on something like that anyway, in terms of further actions. Councilmember Mayhew?
And just to Councilmember Jean's point, what we've actually done is we've lowered, we're doing a 2-year budget right now, a biennial budget. Then what we originally had proposed was 200,000 in 2019, 0 in 2020. There was some belief by staff that they might get it all done in 19, but they didn't say these words, but they basically hinted that probably some of that would get spent in 20. What we've done here is we've lowered the 200,000 in 19 to 115, but we've put 85 back in 20. So it's still 200,000 for the biennium, just like it was before. We've just changed the timing a bit. And about half of that reason is so that we can fully fund the human services budget this year.
Tim, you should work on the NFL salary cap. That's really good shifting. That's impressive.
All right. Does the staff need, I just want to do some house cleaning before we wrap up. It seems like we're pretty much there, but does anyone want, James, do you want to kind of summarize what you?
Really quick? Okay.
Councilmember Sunwald, did you want to add one more point?
No, because my next comment was a motion to adjourn.
Okay. All right, so just to confirm, you want to lower the housing study in 2019 to 115. In 2020, you want to add 85,000 for that same housing study. You want to add 34,000 for human services in 2019?
It's actually less than that, but yes.
About 34?
Yep. It's less $2,500, but we got it.
And then about 37 in 2020.
Right.
You want to delete non-departmental in 2019?
Contingency.
Or, I'm sorry, the non-departmental contingency.
Yep.
Yes.
And then you want to delete the non-departmental contingency fund to the point that it breaks even
In 20.
in 20.
Yes.
Well, break even is a relative term.
Right.
Well, for a balance.
Till it's balanced.
A balanced
Operational.
budget is Operationally still,
Right.
you know,
And that is,
you could say these are balanced, but they're not, you know, there's deltas.
is that correct?
And presentation-wise, we're going to roll the streets maintenance fund into the general
Well, the
fund.
revenues and expenditures of Fund 101.
Right.
For both 1920 will move into the,
To show those
into
as
the
a,
01.
I guess they'll be in there as one of those departments.
There'll be a,
One of the
it's not really
one of the
department, it's a
functions.
function.
One of
yeah.
the functions under
Then
general
the
fund.
function will add,
But you leave the
And,
beginning balance alone.
I'm sorry?
Right.
I leave the beginning fund balance down below, keep this,
Right.
that's, yeah, so we have to protect that.
All right, and then that's what the council will be prepared to approve. All right. Councilmember Sunwald.
I think Jim had something to say. I was just pointing that out.
Sean's trying to bring it home.
So I just want to just remind council, I mentioned this early on, there's one thing that we haven't talked about that will be coming up that we'll have to vote on, which is we've been talking about the so we've got this sheet of all of these funds. So in addition to the funds we've been grappling with tonight, 001 and 101, there are some internal service funds, which we've talked about previously. So these are numbers we're familiar with, but there then are, and there's some utility operating funds, which we've talked about previously, and so I believe we're all comfortable with. But there's also a utility capital fund and a bunch of capital funds that are going to have expenditures being appropriated, that they're going to ask us to appropriate expenditures for. And what they've tried to do is work through this kind of conundrum of we've got ongoing capital projects, so we can't have a zero appropriation or all the projects would have to stop. So there needs to be an appropriation, but we haven't decided what those final amounts will be. And so the proposal that, do you guys want to say what your proposal is, or do you want me to say it? Either. It's not my proposal. I want to make sure that, I mean, this is something they came up with. I support it.
My suggestion was that the budget ordinance include estimated appropriations for the total of capital, and that the ordinance include an additional section in the form of a proviso that would be that capital expenditures for the non-utility projects, because we don't have a currently in place CIP for non-capital projects, that expenditures out of those appropriations would be limited to those projects that are included in a capital improvement program subsequently adopted by council, which would give you the opportunity then by simple majority to have staff bring you a detailed CIP for non-capital projects. Council could review, debate, take your time with that this coming winter and spring quarter, and then those projects could proceed. But you would have dealt with the appropriations, and they'd be in place over the biennium.
And that would come forward with the, next week with the.
Correct.
That's already in, that's kind of why there's numbers in here for all those capital funds.
Right.
Councilmember Sunwell.
So is that time-bound or amount-bound? Because we had talked about how, you know, maybe we gave you everything you need for the first 4 months or the first 6 months. Is there an amount of money that is going to?
It would cover the biennium so that you wouldn't have to deal with the budget ordinance, but the particular projects.
So it's 2 years' worth of capital projects?
Correct.
Okay.
But if you decided not to spend that whole amount, if you only appropriated.
Got it. That makes sense.
Agreed in the CIP for half of that, then the other half's not.
But it's contingent on it, so that money can only be used for projects that are in a CIP approved by us. That seems
Right,
super,
yeah, every
super
project
smart.
has to come back to you guys, and you have to approve the CIP too.
And that's what you get for an in-house city attorney.
Councilmember Mayhew. Oh, is that it?
Oh, sorry, did I say something?
You had your hand up.
Which time? Can I just ask about, city attorney, about the utility CIP? I'm not clear on this. So we have a utility CIP that is approved.
Correct.
Actually, I have two questions. We have a utility CIP that is approved, so wouldn't it be, what you said also be true of wouldn't it be true of all CIP, or was there a difference that I'm missing? Because that's Fund 4, is what, 408, is that right? 408 is am I missing?
417. would be the
417, I
proper
mean, I'm
refresh,
sorry,
yes.
it's 417.
So yes, I would say that we do need to refresh the CIP by bringing.
For the rest of the council, that's the utilities capital fund we're discussing. Sorry about the
Yeah,
fund.
417, yeah. Bingo.
So, but is the number that's in here just straight off the utility CIP, I assume, for expenditures?
I mean, we haven't had time to really dive into the utility CIP, so yes, I would actually say indeed that has come from all the presentations, especially back in April, May, June, for example.
Yeah,
The dollar
so this
amounts listed.
represents what you believe to be the approved utility CIP, right?
Correct.
So I think we can just say all capital fund, I think what you said could be true of all the capital funds.
You could certainly write it that way. I had written it in a more limited way just because, so that there wouldn't be confusion about a subsequently adopted CIP versus one that was
I
previously
think we're going to
adopted,
probably adopt, I think it's going to get changed within probably that same time frame. I think.
And because a number of the ongoing projects are primarily utility projects at the moment.
So
But I
just
think there's going to be a lot of change in the next 6 months. I think.
right, but it's going to be on the tail end of those 6 months because they still have to do the utilities master plan that's going to come out. And we have
Well,
a
either way,
PCI
as long as
study
you
on
guys can be
streets that's
clear
going to
with
take a few
us,
months to come out.
You know, when you bring it to us, so we understand where the
What you're
numbers
doing,
are
right.
that we're
Yeah, I
approving.
mean,
But
the council's prerogative, you could do it either way,
And-
both of them or
well, as long as you
just
explain it
one.
to us, so we understand what we're doing. Whatever you think is simple. Simplest for us is just one thing. But the other question I had is, don't we have a non-utility CIP for 19 and 20? I think the one we have, so in other words, there's projects ongoing in 19 and 20, so I would assume that constitutes a council-approved utility CIP that you would continue spending under, subject to the normal rules for
300 series.
for projects, but I assume that's ongoing, right?
Well, we certainly do have a 2014 through 2020 CIP. However, we should definitely update that as soon as possible.
But for January, February, March, you can just keep spending on those projects, right? Under this ordinance that's being proposed.
Well, it depends on what's in the CIP.
That's correct, that's correct.
Assuming that they funded or provided any funding amounts in 1920.
Under the appropriation that we've recommended on the ordinance, right? If you pass
So we
this the
keep
way it
you- I'm
is,
trying to just
we would
establish
still
we
have the
keep
money.
you in business,
Correct.
right? Even in January and February, you're still in business.
That is
on the
correct.
Good.
Councilmember Shepherd.
So as far as the appropriations and cutting it off for a certain number of months, it coming up in 2019, I asked MRSC if that's reasonable, because I really had no idea. And they said that one concern would be whether the fund has any personnel costs, that many cities have personnel that are shared between several funds. In the event that the funds in question have employee costs, those employees would be precluded from receiving their pay from that fund. What do you think of?
We're not doing that for any of these funds that have personnel involved.
Okay, anything else, Council? Councilmember Say?
Go for it. I just basically wanted to, thank the director for his efforts, because if anybody's taken the brunt of, we have 11 meetings to get to this?
10.
13? I don't know. I lost track.
Counting.
Lucky 13.
And hardly any meetings behind the
So
scenes.
after 47 meetings in 3.5 years, we figured out how to do this in about an hour and a half. But I think it really comes down to department heads and staff and the finance department figuring out how to balance a budget, and to come to this from the standpoint of that the city and the citizens of Snoqualmie expect a balanced budget. We're not pulling reserves, we're not pulling from funds that are inappropriate, we're not using monies that we don't have. And I think that's a really good sign for the city going forward. I think that's where we should be, I think that's where we ought to be, and I think that's where we're expected to be, so.
And unfortunately, it's where we've been.
And I think that's good, though. That shows sustainable, responsible, fiscal responsibility, which is a big part of what we're all tasked with doing. So with that being said, I move to adjourn.
Thank you,
We got
Councilmember Jean said a hand up.
Well, there's
So-
just don't second that.
Matt, thank you for
If I
saying
hear a
those
second,
things.
Yeah.
Thank you for saying those things. So when we get together on the 10th, I'm wondering whether we need to have a little, I mean, we got the balanced budget, but it isn't in front of us yet. Do we need to get together before 7, or can we just start at 7 and get through it?
No, I mean, traditionally, we've liked to have the budget pretty well baked by the time you get to starting the meeting on the day you're
It's like
gonna,
asking your wife to marry, you better know the answer already.
yeah, when you get to the wedding, yeah. The wedding's next week, so I think everybody gotta be prepared.
Mayor, I would suggest that we do not need to meet beforehand, but I'll leave it up to the preference of the council. I think we've got everything in hand here based on what you've discussed. I don't expect to see any changes by Monday afternoon or in the evening, but
I do expect that, the council will get
they'll get
the
us a new
packet in
sheet.
advance and just kind of
Yes.
review to make sure that everything we discussed tonight's been fully captured, and confirm that and move on.
What will be the process for public comment? It'll be obviously the last time
Yeah.
for folks to public. Will there be a formal hearing?
We've held the requisite public hearings, but we did say in the agenda, if there was not a decision tonight, that there would be possible action on Monday night, the 10th, and that the public would be provided opportunities for comments.
Just like every agenda.
Okay, so like
the agenda,
Ordinance or resolution,
3 minutes,
I'll provide
whatever.
an opportunity to comment prior to council discussion. All right, Councilmember Sunwell?
Motion to adjourn?
Second?
I have a motion and a second to adjourn tonight's meeting. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is
Thank you,
carried.
Robert.
Good job, Catherine.